On March 24, 2013, Eliza Sherman followed her routine, arriving on time, doing exactly what she was supposed to do. She stood outside, waiting, just as she had been instructed. Nothing seemed wrong. Nothing seemed out of place. But why was she told to wait outside, at that exact location, at that precise moment? Minutes later, Eliza was found in a nearby alley, fatally stabbed. No robbery. No witnesses. No clear suspect. So what really happened in those few missing minutes? Was this a random act of violence in broad daylight, or was Eliza deliberately placed there by someone who knew her schedule? And if this wasn't random, then the most disturbing question isn't just who killed her, it's who made sure she would be there. On March 24, 2013, Eliza Sherman, a 53-year-old registered nurse and mother of 4, went to the Erie Plaza complex in downtown Cleveland. She had a 10:30 a.m. meeting with her divorce attorney, Gregory Moore. The meeting location was communicated to her via text message. Eliza was in the middle of a complicated divorce, and crucial decisions and a hearing were coming up. She never entered the building. Moore texted her that he was running late and told her to wait outside. Surveillance and digital evidence confirmed she waited near the building, checking her phone. Minutes later, at approximately 11 a.m., Eliza was found in a nearby alley on East 9th Street. She had been stabbed multiple times and was pronounced dead at the hospital shortly after. There was no sign of forced abduction or a prolonged struggle. The attack was quick, targeted, and brutal. Investigators believe Eliza was lured to the location under the guise of a legitimate appointment. The timing of her arrival, the delay, and the location itself suggest a planned attack. Why was she told to wait outside, making her vulnerable? This wasn't random, it implied planning, coordination, and knowledge of her schedule. Someone knew she would be standing there, and everything happened within a very short time frame. Eliza was a dedicated nurse known for her methodical and attentive nature. She was rebuilding her life as she navigated the final stages of her divorce. Court records indicate there were financial and personal disputes that remained unresolved. Despite the divorce, her children were central to her life. She was described as protective and steady. There were no reports of her expressing fear for her safety or any known threats against her. Her life was becoming increasingly complex with work, legal obligations, and communications with her attorney all converging. On March 24th, she followed her schedule precisely, arriving at the designated location at the correct time, a detail that would become crucial to the investigation. Investigators found no evidence of risky behavior or connections to criminal activity. The focus quickly shifted to those within her personal and legal circles. The key question wasn't just who attacked her, but who knew where she would be at that specific time. Eliza was at a turning point in her life, with legal issues and changing relationships. It seemed she was losing control. Then, something specific happened during this period of transition. Was Eliza simply unlucky, or did someone who knew her well plan her movements? The alley was small, practical, and easy to miss. It was located on East 9th Street, near a busy downtown area, but didn't seem dangerous. Delivery trucks used it, and people sometimes walked through it. During the day, it looked like any other part of the city. However, on the morning of March 24, 2013, it became the site of a violent crime. Around 11 a.m., Eliza Sherman was found there, seriously injured. Medical and police records show she had been stabbed more than 10 times. The stabs were focused and precise. Nothing was stolen, and there was no sign of a struggle. The attack appeared quick, targeted, and purposeful. She was still alive when she was found. Emergency services arrived quickly and took her to MetroHealth Medical Center. Despite their efforts, she died shortly after arriving. The time between the attack and her death was very short, just minutes. Investigators started by looking at the facts of the scene. The attack's location, so close to where she was waiting, immediately narrowed the search. This wasn't a kidnapping or a crime that happened in multiple places. Whoever attacked her approached her near where she was supposed to meet someone. This detail was important. No one admitted to witnessing the attack. Surveillance footage from the area only showed some things, like movements and figures, but it had gaps. In the beginning, there was nothing clear enough to identify a suspect. This lack of clarity was itself suspicious. The scene didn't offer much physical evidence. The weapon wasn't found, and there were no immediate forensic clues to solve the case. All that was known was that she arrived, waited, walked toward the alley, and was then attacked. Investigators asked, why that alley? It wasn't a random choice. It was nearby but hidden enough to allow for a few seconds of isolation. Just enough time to commit the crime. The precision of the attack suggested it wasn't impulsive. The timing was too close to her arrival, and the location was exactly on her path. Whoever did it didn't just find her by chance. They met her there. But did she recognize them before the attack, or did it happen too quickly for her to understand the danger? Without a clear suspect, investigators started looking at people close to her. This is standard procedure. In cases without forced entry, theft, or randomness, attention turns to those closest to the victim, family, partners, and professional contacts. Anyone who knew her routine, had access to her, or had a reason to hurt her. For Eliza Sherman, this group was specific but complicated. Her estranged husband was a central figure. Their divorce was ongoing, with unresolved legal disputes about finances, property, and the division of their shared assets. In many investigations, such circumstances immediately raise questions, but suspicion isn't proof. Investigators looked into his movements, alibi, and communications. According to the case records, nothing placed him at the scene. There was no direct evidence connecting him to the attack, and no strong inconsistencies that would lead to charges. The investigation into him remained open but unproven. Next, they focused on another important individual, Gregory Moore, the divorce attorney. He was the last person known to communicate with Eliza before she died. Text messages show he arranged the meeting that brought her to Erie View Plaza that morning. He told her to wait outside because he was running late. This decision, which was documented, left her vulnerable, alone, exposed, and stationary. Investigators began piecing together Moore's activities. They focused on these questions. Where was Moore between the scheduled meeting and the attack? Why was the office locked? Why did he delay the meeting? Initially, Moore claimed he overslept, causing him to miss the appointment. Investigators documented and accepted this explanation, given the case's uncertainties. However, doubts persisted. Moore's role wasn't minor, it was crucial. He arranged the meeting, controlled the timing, and was responsible for Eliza being outside the building at that specific time. Yet, in 2013, no direct evidence connected Moore or anyone else to the assault. There was no matching DNA, weapon found, or eyewitness account. The case remained unresolved, with suspicions existing but lacking solid evidence. Investigators saw a pattern, but couldn't draw a firm conclusion. Was the crime a result of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, fueled by personal issues? Or was it a carefully planned act by someone who knew Eliza's life and schedule intimately? The answers weren't found at the crime scene. They were hidden in the data. With limited physical evidence, investigators turned to digital traces, things unseen at the scene. They examined phone records, messages, and timestamps. In modern investigations, this data often fills gaps in memory. In this case, it revealed a subtle and disturbing pattern. Eliza's phone became a key piece of the puzzle. According to records, her communication with Moore on March 24 was frequent and specific. He confirmed the meeting, acknowledged delays, and told her to wait outside. Each message narrowed the timeline, pinpointing her exact location. She wasn't wandering aimlessly. She was waiting exactly where instructed. Investigators simultaneously analyzed Moore's phone activity, looking at message times, device usage, and location data. What they found didn't directly contradict his story but revealed inconsistencies, gaps, and assumptions that lacked confirmation. Intent was also a question. Why ask a client to wait outside a locked office instead of rescheduling? Why continue communicating without arriving? Prosecutors later argued these decisions weren't accidental. They were part of a plan to put Eliza in a predictable and vulnerable position. Then there was the silence. No emergency call from her phone, no message suggesting trouble. The attack was swift and controlled. There was no digital trace of resistance, just silence. Investigators also reviewed surveillance footage, matching timestamps to phone activity. They tracked movements and analyzed routes. But again, the picture was incomplete. Someone approached her during a short period without leaving a clear digital footprint. That became significant. In a data-rich world, absence can indicate intent. The communication that led her there was documented, but the subsequent violence wasn't. This raised a critical question: was the attacker deliberately avoiding digital traces, or was their involvement hidden within them from the start? Time didn't provide answers. It only prolonged the uncertainty. In the months after March 2013, the investigation remained active but unresolved. Detectives followed leads, re-examined evidence, and interviewed people close to Eliza. However, no arrest was made, and no suspect was officially named. The case slowed down, not from lack of effort, but from lack of proof. The alley remained silent. Without a weapon, witness, or forensic evidence linking anyone to the crime, the case entered a difficult phase. It remained unsolved but never abandoned. For Eliza's family, the pain of her absence never faded. They persistently sought answers, making public appeals and cooperating with investigators. The constant uncertainty created its own kind of emotional burden. They believed, as they stated publicly over the years, that Eliza's case wasn't random and that someone knew what happened to her. Investigators shared this belief. However, belief isn't evidence. Over the years, new tools emerged, like advanced digital forensics and improved investigative techniques. Yet, the fundamental facts of the case remained the same: the timeline, the communications, and the unanswered question of who approached Eliza in her final moments. Gregory Moore remained in the background. He wasn't charged or publicly named as a suspect early on. His role as the last known person to contact Eliza remained in the file, but wasn't the main focus. His explanation wasn't challenged in court, and the investigation seemed to move past him, at least publicly. However, the case never felt completely resolved. The circumstances suggested a deliberate act due to the timing, location, and orchestration of that morning. These elements didn't diminish with time, they became more prominent. As the years passed, the case became a part of Cleveland's unsolved history, a reminder of how quickly a life can be disrupted and how answers can remain elusive. But cold cases can be re-examined. Sometimes, they simply wait. What happens when investigators revisit the same evidence, not with new facts, but with a fresh perspective on what was already there? For over a decade, the case remained unresolved. Then, it progressed. In 2024 to 2025, investigators and prosecutors in Cuyahoga County reopened the case with renewed focus. The evidence hadn't changed significantly, but its interpretation had. According to court documents and statements from prosecutors, attention returned to Gregory Moore, who had always been part of the timeline but never formally charged. This time, the focus was on the implications of the sequence of events, not just Moore's statements. Prosecutors began to reconstruct March 24, 2013, as a planned setup rather than a series of unconnected actions. The text messages, the delayed arrival, and the instruction for Eliza to wait outside a locked office all formed a pattern when viewed together. A pattern suggesting intent. According to the indictment, Moore was accused of creating the conditions that led to Eliza's death. He wasn't necessarily accused of the physical attack itself, but of facilitating it. The prosecution argued that he used the scheduled meeting to place her in a predictable location at a precise time, making her a target. The motive, as stated in court documents, was related to the divorce case. Eliza's legal proceedings were nearing a crucial hearing. Her testimony and its outcome could have had professional repercussions. The state's theory was that delaying or disrupting the process might have been the goal. However, as with all such claims, motive alone wasn't sufficient. Investigators highlighted inconsistencies in Moore's original statements, gaps in his timeline, and questions about his whereabouts that morning. Over time, these details, once inconclusive, gained significance under renewed scrutiny. Then came the charge. In 2025, Gregory Moore was formally arrested and indicted for Eliza Sherman's murder. This announcement marked the first major progress in over a decade. For the family, it meant a shift from silence to hope. In this case, it was a turning point. However, an arrest isn't a conclusion. It's the start of a new phase that requires proof, challenges, and examination in a courtroom. After years of waiting, the story had changed. But had the truth finally emerged, or was this just one interpretation of a story that remained incomplete? The courtroom doesn't erase time, it measures it. More than a decade after Eliza Sherman went to downtown Cleveland for a routine legal meeting, her case entered its final and most critical stage. Gregory Moore's arrest transformed the investigation into a legal battle, where the narrative becomes an argument and evidence is tested under oath. The long-established facts were no longer enough on their own. They needed to be interpreted. The prosecution argued that the attack was planned, not random. They claimed Moore, Eliza's lawyer, manipulated her by setting up a meeting, arriving late, and telling her to wait outside, where she could be easily attacked. They argued this was a deliberate setup. The defense countered that there was no solid proof. They pointed out the lack of a weapon, eyewitnesses placing Moore at the scene, or forensic evidence connecting him to the stabbing. They claimed suspicion had grown over time, but suspicion isn't enough to prove guilt. The case hinged on the question of a deliberate plan versus a lack of definitive evidence. The prosecution presented a seemingly planned sequence of events. The defense highlighted the unanswered questions. The time that had passed complicated the case. As memories faded, evidence deteriorated, and interpretations changed. For Eliza Sherman's family, the legal proceedings meant more than just a resolution. They sought acknowledgement and accountability for the events leading to her death, even if every detail couldn't be pinned down. Their grief was fueled by years of unanswered questions, which were now being addressed in court. However, some questions remained unanswered even as the case progressed. The identity of the attacker was still uncertain. It was unclear whether the plan was carried out alone or with help. The investigation file showed these details were not fully confirmed. The story had developed, but some aspects were still unresolved. In cases like this, justice is rarely complete. It's based on what can be proven, not on everything known or suspected. Eliza Sherman's story continues beyond her death, in the way the system responded, the delays, the relentless pursuit of justice, and the eventual focus on the evidence that was present from the start. Her life was cut short. Her case was delayed. The truth emerged gradually, under pressure, and over time. Ultimately, one question remains, not just about what happened, but about why it took so long to uncover the truth. If the evidence was always there, why did it take so many years to take action? In the peaceful town of Monroe, North Carolina, Kimberly Medlin thought she understood the sources of danger in her life. She worried about intoxicated patrons at the club, unfamiliar people on desolate roads. However, she never suspected that the true danger was observing her, not from the shadows, but from behind the wheel of a police car, studying her routines, tendencies, and anxieties. This is not just the story of a brutal murder. It is the story of how one man turned the symbol of safety into a hunting license, and how a young woman, who did everything right, never made it home. Kimberly Jo Kim Millen Medlin was born on December 1, 1970. She was cheerful, bright-spirited, and had a warm, welcoming smile. People were naturally drawn to her. After graduating high school, she met the love of her life, a young man named Bridger Medlin. Around that time, she began pursuing her education and working steadily. The couple later married and settled on a small horse farm in Monroe, North Carolina. By 1997, Kim was both a student and a hard-working young woman balancing two jobs to support her small family. She was a passionate horseback rider, dreamed of owning her own riding stable one day. Bridger worked tirelessly as well. Together, they planned to finish school, build stable careers, and eventually start a family. But they had no idea that fate was quietly preparing something far darker. Kim worked as a sales associate at a clothing store and also waited tables at a popular men's club in the city. It was a loud, high-energy environment where fights sometimes broke out among intoxicated customers or occasionally even between staff. This happened often enough that Kim hardly reacted to it anymore. She and her co-workers knew how to handle rowdy patrons. Security guards typically diffused situations before they escalated. This wasn't always effective, but the establishment was well known to law enforcement. A police officer could always be called if a situation got out of hand. Such incidents occurred during Kim's shifts, but they were rare, and she managed them with her usual calm. But none of that could protect her from what happened early one March morning in 1997 as she drove home from work. At first, Kim noticed that an unfamiliar vehicle seemed to be following her as she left the club. She changed lanes, slowed down, and sped up to test her suspicion, but the car mimicked her every move. Fearful, she contacted law enforcement. By the time she pulled up behind a patrol car parked along a quiet stretch of road, the pursuer had already sped away. Perhaps realizing his intentions had been discovered, he avoided a direct encounter with the police. Deeply shaken, Kim explained the frightening incident to the officers. They took her statement seriously, reassured her, and opened a report. She admitted this wasn't the first time she had noticed someone suspicious trailing her. Officers documented everything carefully, though the details were too limited to identify the stalker. Even so, they had no intention of ignoring her warning. From that moment on, patrol officers were alerted about the suspicious individual and his vehicle. Kim returned to her routine, working and studying as usual. Only 2 weeks passed after she filed the report. At 4 a.m. on March 29, 1997, an officer on patrol spotted a red SUV pulled over on the side of the road. It didn't look like an accident. The vehicle appeared abandoned. Its engine was running, the headlights were still on, and no one was inside. When officers began examining the car, the situation immediately became alarming. Inside, they found signs of a struggle, strands of light-colored hair and several small drops of blood on the driver's side. Kim's belongings were inside, her wallet, cash, cards, and various personal items. A quick check of the license plates confirmed that the vehicle belonged to Kimberly Jo Kim Millen Medlin. But Kim herself was nowhere in sight. And just like that, a quiet countryside road became the beginning of one of North Carolina's most unsettling murder cases. The first call investigators made was to Kim's home, but no one answered. Early that same morning, her husband, Bridger Medlin, arrived at the police station in person to report that his wife had not returned home after her shift at the men's club. There was no logical explanation for Kim's disappearance, and Bridger was visibly shaken. He remembered the frightening incident weeks earlier when someone had followed her on the road, and he feared that one of the club's customers, or perhaps the same stalker, might have harmed his wife. The abandoned SUV suggested that something terrible had happened. Detectives had already processed the vehicle and found nothing of significant value inside, so they moved on to the surrounding area. Outside, they noticed markings on the ground, what looked like a faint, disturbed trail. Following it and widening the search perimeter, investigators made a grim discovery the very next day. Kim's body had been dumped at the end of a dead-end road, roughly 3 kilometers from where her SUV had been found. Nothing had been taken from the vehicle. Jewelry was still on her body, her wedding ring remained on her finger, and a gold bracelet was still on her wrist. It was immediately clear this had not been a robbery. Kim had been brutally beaten. According to the autopsy, she sustained multiple blows, punched, kicked, and strangled over a prolonged period. There were no signs of abuse, but her back and neck were covered in severe bruises. Many of the marks had a distinctive shape, yet they did not match any common weapon either. The violence had been intense and deliberate. Even in areas of skin that are usually thick and therefore less prone to bruising, deep bruises can still be found. The perpetrator seemed to harbor fierce hatred for his victim. Based on the injuries, Kim appeared to have been ambushed from behind, forced to the ground, and subjected to immense pressure on her back and neck, possibly from the killer stomping on her, causing fractures. There was also evidence indicating she had been restrained. Marks around her wrists suggested immobilization, though no bindings were recovered at the scene. The impressions did not match tape, rope, or zip ties. Experienced forensic experts noted the pattern was highly unusual. To understand who might have attacked the defenseless young woman, detectives began reconstructing her final hours. Her family and close friends cooperated fully. On the surface, none of the people in Kim's life seemed aggressive or dangerous. She had no history of mental illness, substance dependency, or risky social circles. She lived quietly and stayed away from trouble. The only environment that raised concern was her workplace. The men's club drew a wide range of customers, and tensions could escalate easily. Investigators questioned her co-workers, many of whom believed Kim's killer was likely a problematic patron. According to Kim's colleagues, she had finished her shift around 2:00 a.m. As usual, they also provided her complaint about being followed on the street, which they believe is relevant. The detectives then questioned her husband. Bridger confirmed that she called him at that time to let him know she was leaving the club, a routine she never broke. Phone records later verified his statement. Her commute normally lasted only 10 minutes. To save time, she always took a quiet, isolated shortcut road. It was along that same road that her SUV had been discovered, engine running, lights on, but driver missing. Bridger said that after speaking to Kim, he went to bed, exhausted from his long day at work. But when he woke up and started getting ready for his shift, he realized Kim had never returned home and immediately contacted police. His missing person report was filed, but detectives soon identified 2 concerning inconsistencies. First, no one could confirm that Bridger was actually home at the time he claimed. Only the phone record proved Kim had called the house. After that call, he had more than enough time to commit the crime. Second, detectives questioned his account of falling asleep so easily. How could he have gone to bed without waiting for his wife to return from a late-night shift? And how did he not notice her absence until morning? His delayed report raised doubts. Despite these concerns, Bridger behaved calmly and appeared devastated. At first glance, he seemed suspicious, but he acted very calmly. He seemed like a sincerely grieving widower who had lost his beloved. When investigators began verifying Bridger Medlin's statements, several witnesses stepped forward claiming they had seen a black van resembling his driving through town around the time Kim went missing. Bridger firmly denied any involvement, insisting he had been home the entire night. Detectives still lacked evidence to charge him with anything. But the conflicting accounts forced them to slow down and re-examine every detail. Family, friends, and colleagues were interviewed extensively to help investigators understand the dynamics of the couple's relationship. Everyone described Bridger as attentive, hard-working, and deeply devoted to his wife. Like any married couple, they had minor disagreements, but nothing even close to violent or hostile. Detectives tried to identify a motive, yet none emerged. The Medlins had no life insurance policies, no significant assets, no children, no affairs, and no discussions of divorce, factors that often contribute to spousal homicides. Suspicion surrounding Bridger weakened further when another witness came forward, claiming that Bridger's van had remained parked in the driveway all night. Although his alibi was far from airtight, investigators no longer considered him their primary focus. Attention shifted to other avenues. Based on the timeline, Kim had called her husband before driving home. She then continued along her usual route, a quiet suburban stretch of highway, before stopping unexpectedly. There was nothing on that road to make her pull over voluntarily. Detectives began to suspect that Kim had stopped because she believed she was being pulled over by law enforcement. This theory also explained the unusual marks on her wrists. Forensic examiners recognized the pattern instantly: pressure injuries consistent with metal handcuffs applied far too tightly. Then, an unexpected development occurred. A man arrived at the police station, claiming he was the same driver Kim had reported weeks earlier, the one who followed her from the men's club. He insisted he had nothing to do with her murder. He admitted he had been drunk that night and acted out of anger because Kim had removed him from the club 2 weeks earlier for inappropriate behavior. Wanting to scare her, he followed her car, but backed off when she neared a location where patrol officers usually parked. He said he came forward because he had heard that a waitress from the club had been killed and didn't want police hunting for him. His confession seemed genuine, but his alibi still had to be checked. Investigators soon confirmed he was telling the truth. On the night of Kim's murder, he had been at work during an overnight shift. Multiple co-workers and his manager backed him up. CCTV footage with timestamps also confirmed his presence. He was ruled out completely. And just like that, the list of suspects was empty again. Detectives felt trapped in a standstill. No one believed Bridger was guilty, neither Kim's family nor his own. Everyone knew him as a gentle, even-tempered man. The marriage showed no signs of trouble. There was still no motive at all. With no progress, investigators held a press conference, hoping someone from the public had seen something unusual on that isolated road during the early morning hours. Their request paid off. A motorist came forward, saying he had seen a patrol car following a vehicle matching the description of Kim's red SUV. He explained that he had driven behind both vehicles for a short distance and noticed how unnaturally synchronized their movements were, close enough to raise concern. At the time, he dismissed it. Only after watching the news did he realize the significance. Investigators showed him photographs of patrol cars from nearby jurisdictions. Based on the details he remembered, they concluded the car appeared to be a Monroe Police Department patrol vehicle. The possibility was chilling. The killer might have been someone wearing a badge. Because all patrol cars in Monroe were identical models, the witness could not identify the exact unit number, but his account aligned perfectly with the new theory. It explained why Kim had stopped on a deserted highway. She likely believed she was being pulled over by an officer she trusted, or at least someone who looked like one. By this point, investigators had already analyzed every piece of evidence they collected, but the new lead forced them to re-examine everything, especially hoping to find fingerprints or trace materials they might have missed the first time. Unfortunately, nothing useful surfaced. That was not entirely surprising. If the killer really was connected to law enforcement, he would have known exactly how to avoid leaving any trace behind. A follow-up inspection finally revealed something investigators had overlooked: a distinctive imprint left on Kim's sweatshirt. Forensic analysis determined that it was the heel mark of a woman's shoe, not a sneaker or standard boot. Alongside it was another peculiar marking, a small V-shaped imprint. The experts began searching for the manufacturer. At first, he found nothing. No popular brands used a heel design or lettering like this. He then shifted to small-scale or specialized footwear producers. He examined hundreds of models, visited stores in person, and checked suppliers who made shoes for niche professions. That was when he found an exact match. The shoes were produced by a small manufacturer in Wisconsin, a company so specialized and obscure that even in that industry, few people had heard of it. They made only a few dozen models, and one of them had the exact same heel pattern and the same letter imprint found on Kim's clothing. The next step was to determine the killer's size. By reconstructing the pressure marks and depth of the imprint, the forensic lab concluded that the perpetrator wore size 39-40. In only a matter of days, the focus of the investigation narrowed dramatically. The killer was likely a Monroe police officer wearing this rare shoe model. When detectives checked the boots of officers in the department, they found 3 who owned this exact model. 1 wore size 39 and 2 wore size 40. The first officer worked for the fire division and had been on duty the entire night of the murder. He had no connection to Kim, did not frequent the men's club, and had a strong, independently verified alibi. He was immediately removed from the list. The second officer had spent the night investigating a robbery. He was stationed at an elderly couple's house on the opposite end of town and remained in constant radio contact with dispatch. His alibi was airtight. The third officer was Josh Griffin. On the night Kim was murdered, Griffin had worked until 10 o'clock p.m. According to his statement, he went straight home afterward. What immediately drew attention was that he had patrolled the very stretch of highway where Kim's abandoned SUV was later found. Griffin claimed he had seen nothing unusual that night, no stopped vehicles, no suspicious activity. In theory, this made sense. By the time Kimberly left the men's club around 2 o'clock a.m., Josh Griffin should have been asleep at home. He insisted that after his shift he did nothing else, saying he had been too exhausted to leave his house. Investigators inspected Griffin's patrol car first. What they found was unsettling. The inside of the vehicle was spotless, as if it had been aggressively cleaned very recently. They immediately flagged this as suspicious. Griffin had a reputation for being exceptionally untidy. For years, the department joked that his patrol car was the filthiest in the fleet, and that anyone riding with him practically needed to wash their clothes afterward. Yet now, after Kim's murder, the same car was immaculate, cleaner than it had ever been since the day it was issued to him. Griffin dismissed the comments, insisting everyone was exaggerating, but investigators' suspicions were already growing. When detectives searched Griffin's home, they were especially interested in his footwear. The distinctive boots he was known to wear, the exact model that matched the imprint on Kim's sweatshirt, were nowhere to be found. When questioned, Josh claimed he had thrown them away because they had torn during his last investigation. But according to multiple colleagues, Griffin wore that particular model constantly and had never mentioned them being damaged. Suspicions surrounding Officer Josh Griffin grew even stronger. Once investigators revisited interviews with Kim's colleagues at the men's club, they confirmed that Josh was a familiar face there, a regular customer known for his temper, unsettling behavior. He often acted defiant, used his badge as a shield to intimidate people. He was generally avoided by both staff and patrons. Female employees, in particular, recalled how disrespectful and aggressive he could be. But everything changed when he first noticed Kim. It was clear he was immediately drawn to her. He repeatedly tried to strike up conversations, but Kim, modest, reserved, and married, turned him down every time. She did not like Josh, and the two had engaged in several verbal confrontations at the club, though none were serious enough to warrant formal complaints. Investigators now needed to dismantle Josh's alibi, which claimed he had been home asleep at the time of the murder. They seized his cell phone as part of the investigation. The records revealed a call made at 2 o'clock a.m. Not from his home, but from his patrol car. Despite the limited precision of cell tower triangulation at the time, detectives determined he had been parked at an intersection just outside the men's club parking lot. The spot provided a perfect view of the club entrance. It was now clear that Josh had not been home at all. When confronted with these findings, he changed his story. He claimed that after his shift ended, he had simply stayed in his patrol car to read a book. The call at 2 o'clock a.m., he said, was him requesting a tow truck for a stranger who had approached him for help with a broken-down vehicle. This new explanation only raised more questions. According to the timeline, Kim drove past that exact intersection roughly 30 minutes later, taking her usual shortcut home. Josh Griffin, therefore, had ample opportunity to follow her without raising suspicion, as he was in full uniform and driving a marked police car. Even so, Josh continued to deny any involvement. Because the evidence was still circumstantial, he was released pending further investigation. More troubling information emerged shortly afterward. Several of Griffin's co-workers admitted they had heard him talk repeatedly about a girl in a red SUV he found attractive. He had made comments, some inappropriate, about Kim more than once. It became clear that his interest in her was not casual but obsessive. As rumors spread that the killer might be a police officer, Monroe's police department initially resisted the idea. No one wanted a scandal implicating one of their own, but the leak proved unexpectedly helpful. Multiple young women came forward reporting that a patrol officer had harassed them. They described being followed in their cars, approached on isolated roads, and confronted in public places. The pattern was unmistakable. Josh Griffin had used his badge to intimidate women for years. But Kim had rejected him firmly, and that rejection only intensified his fixation. Soon the theory became clear. Investigators believed Griffin had driven to the area near the club specifically because he knew Kim would be leaving work. He had studied her routine and waited until the perfect moment. They suspected he followed her onto the rural road where she usually drove home. Then, using the authority of his uniform and patrol car, he forced her to pull over. She likely believed it was an ordinary traffic stop, until she realized the truth. Detectives reconstructed the likely sequence of events. Griffin handcuffed Kim, dragged her off the road, and launched into a sustained attack. He beat her, choked her using what was likely a police flashlight, and applied such force to her neck, back that he fractured her vertebrae, standing on her body with full weight. That was when the distinctive heel imprint from his shoe pressed into her sweatshirt. In February 1998, Josh Griffin was charged with kidnapping and first-degree murder. He continued to deny all accusations, but the evidence against him had grown overwhelming. During the preliminary hearing, numerous witnesses testified, including the motorist who had reported seeing a patrol car tailing Kim's SUV, several officers who worked alongside Griffin, and multiple women who had previously been harassed by him. The defense attempted to portray Griffin as a respectable officer, but the community knew better. Witness after witness described his volatile temper, inappropriate comments, and reckless abuse of authority. In February 1998, after closing arguments from both the prosecution and the defense, the jury deliberated for only a few hours before returning with a unanimous verdict. Josh Griffin was found guilty on all charges. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Years went by before Griffin finally requested a recorded interview with investigators. In that meeting, he admitted to everything. He said he couldn't fully explain what pushed him to commit such a horrific act, but he confirmed much of what detectives had long suspected. He acknowledged that he tried to approach Kim multiple times, and when she firmly rejected him, something inside him snapped. He confessed that he kidnapped her, handcuffed her, beat her, stomped on her, and strangled her with his police flashlight. After killing her, he took her driver's license. Griffin said he tore it into tiny pieces and flushed them down the toilet. As for the missing pair of shoes, he admitted that he discarded them in a dumpster behind a local supermarket on the same morning of the murder. He realized those distinctive footprints could track him down and panicked. By confessing, Josh Griffin said he finally felt he had cleared his conscience. His sentence, however, remains unchanged. What happened to Kim is more than a tragic crime. It is a warning, a reminder that power without integrity becomes a weapon, and that the people we depend on the most can sometimes be the ones who betray that trust in the most horrific way. Kimberly Jo Kim Millen Medlin was a daughter, a wife, a friend, a woman with dreams, goals, and a future that should never have been stolen. Her story continues to echo through Monroe. In a quiet town deep in rural Brazil, the gentle light of a small house cut through the darkness. Inside, Valdemir Hochler, husband, father, and a hard-working man who split his days between driving and caring for cattle, was living what no one realized would be his final night. Within those familiar walls, love turned into jealousy, and fear grew into something far more dangerous. By morning, Valdemir had vanished. No phone calls, no messages, just an absence that immediately felt wrong. His sons searched the roads he often drove, while neighbors whispered and police joined the effort. Still, nothing surfaced, until suspicion turned toward the house where he was last seen. In that house, there was a freezer that was still strangely forbidden. Days later, When the police finally opened the freezer, the truth inside was cold, silent, and beyond imagination. What truly happened in that house on November 14th? How did a family built over decades collapse into betrayal, fear, and a discovery that would stun an entire community? Valdemir Hochler was born in 1979 in Brazil, into a large family. From a young age, he learned the meaning of responsibility and hard work. As an adult, he was loved by everyone for his kind and trustworthy character. He made a living as a driver and also managed a small cattle business in the countryside. His life seemed stable. Valdemir married Janet, a woman he loved deeply, and they had 2 sons, Jonathan and Mateus. For a while, their family was very happy. However, when Mateus was less than a year old, everything changed. Valdemir confessed to Janet that he had an affair and a child from another relationship. The woman was Claudia Fernanda Tavares, a former teacher who worked in the dairy industry. She gave birth to a baby girl named Gabriela, just a few months after Mateus was born. This truth devastated Janet. She felt betrayed and did not know how to cope. Despite her heartbreak, she chose not to divorce, hoping Valdemir would eventually end his affair and return to their family. For a time, Valdemir moved in with Claudia to help care for their newborn daughter, Gabriela. Claudia gave up her job to focus on raising Gabriela. Over time, the children began to form bonds, with Gabriela often visiting Jonathan and Mateus. The 3 brothers played happily together, unaware of the tension between the adults. For Janet, life became a series of tiring days. Claudia constantly harassed her family, followed them on the streets and tried to disrupt their lives. Even during family gatherings, Claudia's presence made everyone uneasy. One time, when Valdemir was taking Janet and the children to her mother's birthday party, Claudia followed them in her car. The pursuit was so intense that Janet tried to hide inside the vehicle to avoid being seen. Claudia tailed them for miles until they finally managed to get away. An experience Janet later called sheer madness. But it didn't stop there. Claudia even visited their home, even when they were entertaining friends. Each time Valdemir was discovered, he had to go into hiding to avoid trouble. Her control over him seemed to grow, and she could not accept his ongoing contact with Janetti, whom she viewed as a rival. The harassment continued over the phone. Claudia called their home repeatedly, using harsh words to insult Janete and her relatives. Claudia bragged about her relationship with Valdemir and mocked Janete, saying that she was just a maid and that her husband loathed her. Yet according to Janet, those claims were far from reality. Finally, because she was so tired and could not bear it anymore, Janet decided to end everything. She packed up Valdemir's belongings, brought them to Claudia's house, and left them there, forcing him to leave. From that day on, Valdemir lived with Claudia. Despite this, Valdemir maintained a relationship with his 2 sons, Jonathan and Mateus. They met regularly, went out, ate, and enjoyed happy moments together. Occasionally, Janete joined in, and despite the tensions, Valdemir always maintained a respectful attitude towards her. Valdemir continued to support his children financially and emotionally, ensuring they never lacked. Over time, despite the family being broken, they gradually found a balance. On weekends, the whole family sometimes gathered to eat, and in those moments, Valdemir's hearty laughter and cheerful personality warmed the atmosphere. Jonathan had started a family of his own. Like his younger brother Mateus, he visited their father about once a month. On the contrary, Gabriela chose a different path at the age of 18. She left home to live independently. Her relationship with her father became distant, but she stayed close to her mother, Claudia. By mid-2022, after years of ups and downs, Valdemir and Claudia finally got married. Around that same time, Valdemir was facing a major loss, the death of his father. The inheritance that followed led to new conflicts among his siblings. Some of Valdemir's assets and funds were not in his name but managed through his sons and trusted associates. Even with the challenges, he kept a stable income as a driver, received a pension, and maintained his livestock business. He dreamed of using his inheritance to buy more land and ensure a stable future for his children. In early November 2022, Jonathan, his wife, and their 3 small children visited Valdemir and Claudia at their home. Although Jonathan remains somewhat suspicious of Claudia, finding her too strict, he remains polite and attends family gatherings. That weekend, a few of their friends also came to the gathering. Everything seemed normal. The group ate together, laughed, and shared stories late into the night. Jonathan and his family even decided to stay overnight, but the following week, Matthias and Jonathan noticed that their father, Valdemir, is unusually quiet. By Tuesday, November 15, 2022, worry turned to panic. Valdemir, known for being punctual and responsible, failed to show up for work. A colleague called Claudia to ask about him, but she surprisingly replied that she did not know where he was. Within hours, she reported him missing to the police. The news was not delivered directly to Janete and her sons, but through a family acquaintance. Jonathan feared that his father might have fainted or suffered an accident while working. Family members rushed to the rural areas he often visited, but the search turned up nothing. As time passed, rumors began to spread. Some have suggested that Valdemir may have harmed himself, but his family has dismissed that idea. They knew him as cheerful and full of plans for the future, financially stable, caring for his animals, and deeply devoted to his children. A more believable theory was that he had left home temporarily, perhaps after a disagreement with Claudia. Still, no one could foresee the truth that was about to emerge. Jonathan and his wife decided to put aside their suspicions and stay with Claudia to help with the search. That evening, the area around Claudia's house was tense. Police, firefighters, and neighbors searched the property for any sign of Valdemir. Jonathan looked through his father's phone, but found nothing that explained his sudden disappearance. Claudia insisted the previous weekend had been uneventful. They had eaten pizza with friends and spent Sunday peacefully together. Her story sounded reassuring, but small details began to raise doubts. That night, Jonathan and his wife stayed at the house. Claudia refused to sleep in her bedroom, choosing instead to stay on the living room sofa, saying she wanted to be awake in case her husband came back. From that spot, she had a clear view of the refrigerator. When Jonathan went to get a glass of water, Claudia reacted strangely, as if the sight of him opening the fridge made her uneasy. He dismissed it at the time, thinking she was just anxious and grieving, but in the following days, her behavior continued to draw attention. Claudia became unusually protective of the refrigerator, refusing to let anyone else open it and insisting on serving all the food herself to those helping with the search. On Saturday, November 19, 3 days after Claudia reported Valdemir missing, she was summoned to the police station to give an official statement. Investigators did not yet see her as a suspect, but because of her close relationship with Valdemir, questioning her was unavoidable. During the interview, officers noticed visible injuries on her body, marks that looked like signs of a struggle. When asked, she agreed to undergo a forensic examination. However, shortly after leaving the station, she vanished. Around the same time, the investigation took an unexpected turn. A neighbor came forward with crucial information, something strange he had noticed that made him uneasy for days. Everyone knew Claudia's freezer was usually empty. She rarely stocked it beyond a few basic items. But when police entered her home, they found the freezer unusually full, packed with food that no one remembered her buying. The sight immediately struck investigators as suspicious, with the search having yielded no results and the case becoming increasingly confusing. The police decided to examine the freezer closely. As they began to remove each layer of items, the horrifying truth gradually emerged. Hidden beneath the frozen food was the body of Valdemir, 43 years old. Preserved in the freezer, Claudia had carefully guarded. Preliminary evidence pointed to a horrifying scenario. Investigators believed Claudia had cleared the freezer, placed her husband's body inside, and then covered it with food to disguise the crime. The discovery shocked the community. Within hours, an arrest warrant was issued for her. As the news spread, people thought the search for Claudia would be prolonged. But shortly after, she appeared at the police station to surrender. Before that, she recorded a video and posted it online, declaring her readiness to take responsibility before the law. During the interrogation, Claudia confessed to killing Valdemir. She said she lived in fear, was constantly threatened by her husband, and believed he could kill her at any time. She insisted that her actions were in self-defense. According to her account, on the night of November 14, 2022, she gave Valdemir a sleeping pill. Once he was unconscious, she tied his limbs using techniques she had learned from her work on dairy farms. She said she briefly hesitated, realizing the seriousness of her actions, but thoughts of her own safety and her daughter's pushed her forward. She admitted to suffocating him with a plastic bag. Claudia described him as a jealous and abusive man. She recalled an incident 2 weeks earlier when he slapped her in public, which she said was the breaking point. On the night of the murder, he had forbade her from attending a New Year's party with co-workers, again asserting control. In her version, the killing was not planned revenge, but a desperate act of survival. Afterward, she told investigators she felt something she hadn't felt in years: freedom. Her defense attorney reinforced this view, portraying her as a woman driven to the edge by years of physical and psychological abuse. But the evidence told another story. Her injuries, inconsistencies in her testimony, and the gruesome effort to hide the body suggested something far darker. Authorities charged her, then 40 years old, with aggravated murder, concealment of a corpse, and making false statements. As her story spread across news outlets and social media, the case ignited national debate in Brazil about domestic violence, mental health, and the thin line between victimhood and accountability. For Valdemir's family, however, no explanation could ease the pain. The discovery shattered their lives. Jonathan, especially, could not move past one unsettling memory. During the days they searched for Valdemir, he and his wife had stayed at Claudia's house. She insisted on serving the meals herself and never let anyone open the freezer. At the time, he found it odd but thought little of it. After learning the truth, that moment haunted him while volunteers moved around the house helping. Claudia calmly took food from the refrigerator, the same place where her husband's body had been hidden, frozen in silence. For Gabriella, the revelation was unbearable. She had lost her father in the most unimaginable way, and the woman accused of killing him was her own mother. She was both shocked and filled with compassion. Despite her fear and hurt, she tried to be there for Claudia, the only mother she had left. Janet, Jonathan, and Matthaus understood that she was facing the greatest loss of all. Whatever their grief, they couldn't ignore that Gabriella was now a young woman without a father and with a mother in custody. Claudia stood by her version of events. She told investigators she had acted to protect her daughter, claiming Valdemir was jealous of her bond with Gabriella. She said Gabriella's decision to leave the house was due to the toxic environment Valdemir created. Meanwhile, the grim logistics of death unfolded slowly. Defrosting Valdemir's body took several days, delaying the wake and forcing relatives to endure prolonged anguish. When the funeral finally took place, what should have been a private farewell turned into a public spectacle. The media swarmed the ceremony, drawn by the shocking details of the case. Cameras flashed. Neighbors, friends, and even strangers stood by. Adding to the already distraught family's despair, investigators eventually reached a clear conclusion. Claudia had acted with premeditation. Still, one question lingered. Had she acted alone? Some suspected an accomplice, someone who might have helped move or hide the body. But according to the civil police, all evidence indicated that Claudia acted by herself. Even Valdemir's relatives, initially doubtful that she could have managed alone, came to agree. If she had help, they reasoned, the body would likely have been disposed of in a more typical way, perhaps abandoned in a vehicle or buried somewhere remote. The decision to use the freezer suggested that she had acted impulsively, out of fear and pressure. The motive, however, remained uncertain. Investigators uncovered conflicting accounts about Valdemir's character. One of his sisters had once accused him of violent behavior, though further inquiry revealed the dispute was likely linked to disagreements over inherited property rather than abuse. Records also showed that Claudia had filed a domestic violence complaint in 2019. The alleged incident happened during a heated argument about Gabriella's wish to move away for school, a decision fiercely opposed by her father. Claudia had helped her daughter leave without his permission. When Valdemir discovered what had happened, the conflict escalated. Later, he accused Claudia of taking a large sum of money from the house, money he believed was meant to help Gabriella move. Claudia, in turn, claimed that he had taken it himself. For Janette, hearing these claims was excruciating. She refused to believe that Valdemir had ever been violent, describing him instead as a man dedicated to his family. Another detail that complicated the case: Valdemir kept a large sum of cash at home, intended to be used to buy land, estimated to be between $38,000 and $50,000. One of his brothers claimed to have seen the money with his own eyes. In addition, Valdemir often sent money to relatives or trusted friends, raising suspicions that Claudia may have been motivated by greed, not just fear or self-defense. Some family members believe that she had been well prepared, had her intentions for a long time, and was just waiting for the right moment to act. They believe Claudia struck just before Valdemir installed a new security camera system, which would have exposed her every move. In August 2023, the case resurfaced when a court in Santa Catarina granted Claudia conditional release with electronic monitoring. She was permitted to work at a construction plant during the day and as a restaurant cook at night while awaiting trial. The decision sparked public outrage, with many viewing it as a miscarriage of justice. Soon afterward, the Superior Court of Justice reversed the ruling, citing the seriousness of the crime, the concealment of the body, and Claudia's attempts to mislead investigators. She was again placed in preventive detention. Her lawyer continued to defend her under a contingency agreement, stating he would only collect payment if she were acquitted. He has publicly expressed his belief that Claudia is completely convinced of her innocence. The trial of Claudia Fernanda Tavares began at 9:00 a.m. on Thursday, August 28, 2025. And lasted until dawn the following day. The witness testimony alone took up more than 11 hours. Before the jury, Claudia Fernanda Tavares, 43, was sentenced to 20 years and 24 days in a strict prison regime, with aggravating circumstances, for the murder of her husband, Valdemir Hochler, 52, a driver. The case of Valdemir Hochler remains one of the most disturbing in recent Brazilian history. For his family and friends, the loss left a lasting wound. The man they once loved and trusted was dead, and the woman who once confessed her love to him was accused of causing his death. That morning in Northwest Houston started like any other. The street was quiet, the houses looked the same, and there were no sounds of sirens or screams. But behind the closed door of a house on Emma Forrest Street, an unnatural silence had fallen. On March 12, 2025, 32-year-old Kristen Chavez was found dead inside her own home. a place that should have been safe. People quickly realized that she had been murdered. The prime suspect was the person closest to her, her husband. There was no need for a manhunt. He was still at the house when the police arrived. There was blood, a common household object used as a weapon, and 4 dogs were missing, having disappeared sometime before Kristen's death. The mystery was, what happened in those last, quiet hours, as if nothing violent had ever taken place? The story begins with a door in Northwest Houston and a moment that feels too still for mourning. On March 12, 2025, Kristen Chavez, 32, is found dead inside her home on Emma Forest Street in the Oak Forest area. Pronounced at the scene, her death is quickly treated as a homicide. A single fact anchors the first hours. Police say her husband, Chance Chavez, 34, is arrested and charged with murder. Outside, the neighborhood looks like any other. Lawns, driveways, the quiet geometry of ordinary life. Inside, investigators are faced with a kind of violence that doesn't fit the setting. Court reporting later describes an iron split, damage linked by prosecutors to the attack, a domestic object reframed as a weapon. The air around the case turns cold fast, not because the public knows everything, but because they know enough. A woman is dead, the suspect is close, the scene is personal. According to the reporting on what officers encountered, Chance Chavez is at the home when police arrive. Prosecutors would later describe him with blood on his body and clothing, raising his hands as if surrendering. It is an early investigative turning point. Not a long search, not a stranger in the dark, but a case that collapses inward toward the people already inside the frame. And then there is the detail that doesn't belong to the script of a typical call-out. Family members and local reporting say Kristen's dogs, 4 of them, were allegedly taken and abandoned along the Katy Freeway hours before she was found. It lands like a flare over the city, a clue, a distraction, or a signature, something that invites witnesses, tips, and public emotion before investigators have even finished photographing the walls. One fact is clear, early. Kristen is gone, and the investigation begins at home. The feeling is harder to quantify. A closed door can hold an entire storm. The leading question tightens as daylight spreads across Emma Forest Street. If the evidence points inward so quickly, what was happening in the hours before police arrived? The case is only opening, but already it's moving toward the past, toward the marriage, toward the patterns investigators look for when violence erupts in private. Before the violence becomes public record, Kristen exists in quieter facts. She is 32 years old. She lives in Northwest Houston. She works. She keeps dogs. She has a routine that, until it breaks, appears ordinary. According to family statements and early reporting, nothing in the days immediately before her death suggests she was planning to disappear. There is no packed bag, no goodbye message, no sign she is preparing to leave her life behind. The silence comes abruptly. Friends and relatives later describe Kristen as close to her family, engaged with her everyday world, and anchored by responsibilities that assume a future. The home in Emma Forest is not described as temporary. It is a place of settling, yet, according to accounts shared after her death, there are hints, small, incomplete, of strain inside the marriage. Nothing formally documented as criminal, nothing that triggers outside intervention. The kind of tension that often remains private until it can no longer. Investigators working backward focus on routine because routine is what collapses first. Phone activity, daily movements, whether she answered messages, whether she showed up where she was expected. According to the investigation file, there is no evidence that Kristen leaves the house alive after a certain point. Her world narrows to the interior of her home, to a timeline measured in hours rather than days. The dogs become part of that backward walk. Family members would later say they believe the dogs were removed from the home before Kristen's death. That detail matters because it suggests forethought, an action taken not in panic, but in preparation. It reframes the hours before the killing as a sequence, not an explosion. Someone is thinking ahead. Someone is making choices. Emotion enters the case through absence. Kristen does not call anyone for help. There is no confirmed emergency call from her phone. No neighbor reports hearing a disturbance loud enough to trigger a police response. The house holds its secret long enough for the night to pass into morning. That quiet weighs heavily in domestic homicide investigations, where violence often unfolds without witnesses and ends before anyone outside knows to listen. Police attention begins to settle on the relationship itself, not because of gossip, but because statistics and case history demand it. Intimate partners are always examined first. Alibis are tested, timelines are tightened, financial and digital records are flagged for later review. At this stage, investigators are not proving guilt. They are establishing context. Who had access? Who had a motive? Who was present when the silence began? One fact remains steady. Kristen does not leave her home alive. The feeling beneath it is unease, the sense that whatever happened was not spontaneous, but building quietly behind closed doors. And the question investigators cannot avoid is simple and heavy. If the warning signs were subtle, what did they add up to in the final hours before her voice went quiet? When investigators step inside the house on Emma Forest, the scene does not shout. It tells its story slowly. According to court filings and police statements, Kristen was found with fatal injuries consistent with blunt force trauma. The medical examiner will later confirm homicide. The fact is stark. The atmosphere is colder still. This is not a break-in, not a chaotic ransacking. It is a domestic space altered by violence, where everyday objects remain close at hand. Among those objects is an iron. Prosecutors will later identify it as the alleged weapon. Its presence matters because it anchors the crime in the ordinary. No firearm brought from outside. No blade is hidden on a person. Something is already in the house. Something within reach. According to the investigation file, the iron is damaged, split in a way consistent with repeated force. That detail becomes a pivot. It suggests not a single impulsive strike, but sustained violence. Blood evidence reinforces that reading. Investigators document blood on the suspect's body and clothing, and blood at the scene. The distribution is important. It places violence inside the home and ties it to proximity. There is no indication of an attempt to clean the scene before the police arrive. No elaborate staging. The story the house tells is one of immediacy events that moved faster than any plan to conceal them afterward. Yet the crime scene also raises restraint questions. There are no signs of forced entry, no broken doors or windows. That absence narrows the field. It supports a theory that Kristen knew the person who killed her. Someone she allowed close. Someone is already inside. In domestic homicide cases, this pattern is familiar, and investigators treat it carefully, aware of how often familiarity becomes leverage. Time becomes the next variable. When exactly did the assault occur? How long was Kristen alone afterward? According to police, the timeline is reconstructed through phone data, witness statements, and the discovery of her body. There is no confirmed emergency call from her phone, no final message. The silence is total. It suggests the violence was sudden and overwhelming, leaving no space to reach outside the room. One fact crystallizes as evidence is logged and photographed. The crime scene does not point outward. It points inward, toward the relationship and the hours immediately before the killing. The feeling it leaves behind is claustrophobic, the sense of a life ending without escape, inside familiar walls. And the question investigators carry forward is unavoidable. If the house tells the truth, why were steps allegedly taken outside its steps involving the dogs before Kristen was killed? Hours before Kristen is found dead, something happens that does not fit the quiet geometry of the house. According to family members and early reporting cited in the investigation file, 4 of Kristen's dogs were allegedly removed from the home and abandoned along the Katy Freeway. Some are found wandering near traffic, others are recovered later. The fact is unusual enough to pull the case into public view almost immediately. For investigators, the dogs are not a sideshow. They are a timeline marker, living evidence that someone left the house, traveled a distance, and made deliberate choices before returning or not returning. This is not an act that happens during a sudden fight. It requires time, transportation, intention. It introduces the idea of sequencing, suggesting that events unfolded in stages rather than a single moment of loss of control. The image of domesticated animals left in danger resonates far beyond the courtroom. It triggers calls, tips, outrage. But detectives work to strip away emotion and focus on function. Why remove the dogs at all? In domestic homicide investigations, Animals often represent obstacles, witnesses that bark, disruptions that draw attention. Their removal can indicate planning, or at least an attempt to create conditions for privacy. The freeway itself matters. The Katy Freeway is busy, visible, and unpredictable. Abandoning animals there risks public discovery. That risk raises questions. Was the goal to permanently get rid of them, or simply to remove them from the house temporarily? Investigators consider whether this act was meant to delay discovery, prevent interference, or serve as a distraction. According to the investigation file, there is no evidence that the dogs were harmed, but their abandonment is treated as an intentional act tied to the larger sequence of events. Witness accounts become critical here. Drivers, passers-by, anyone who may have seen a vehicle stop, doors open, and animals released. This is where a private crime brushes against public space. Surveillance cameras, traffic cameras, cell phone pings. The investigation widens briefly, not to look for a stranger, but to document movement. One fact anchors the theory building: the dogs are allegedly gone before Kristen's death. The feeling surrounding that fact is deeply unsettling, a sense that choices were made in advance of violence. And the question investigators begin to ask grows sharper. If someone took the time to remove the dogs, what does that say about what they believed was coming next? The case tightens as attention turns back toward the person police say was inside the house when they arrived. The next layer is not about animals or highways, but about a suspect standing in the doorway of the crime scene itself. When police arrive at the house on Emma Forest, they do not search the neighborhood. They do not set up roadblocks. According to police statements and court reporting, the suspect is already there. Chance, Kristen's husband, is at the home when officers make contact. The fact is immediate and inescapable. This is not a case that unfolds over miles. It collapses into a single address. Prosecutors later describe what officers observe: blood on Chance's body and clothing, his hands raised. His presence is framed by the doorway of the house where Kristen is dead inside. According to the investigation file, this moment becomes a critical anchor point. It shortens the investigative arc dramatically. Instead of asking who might have entered the home, detectives focus on what happened between the two people who lived there. Arrests in domestic homicide cases are often quiet, procedural. No chase, no dramatic confession. Just a tightening of handcuffs and a shift from scene management to case building. Chance is taken into custody and later charged with murder. The legal language is firm, but restrained. Allegations, not conclusions. Evidence, not verdicts. Investigators begin constructing the suspect profile not from rumor, but from proximity and access. He had keys, he had time, he had an opportunity. These are not assumptions, they are logistical facts. Detectives review phone records, financial activity, and movements tied to his name. They examine injuries. They document statements. At this stage, inconsistencies matter more than motives. The goal is not to explain why, but to establish what can be proven. The defense posture has not yet fully emerged, but the outline is familiar. Presence does not equal guilt. Blood can be explained. Silence can be strategic. Investigators know this. That is why physical evidence becomes central. The alleged weapon, the condition of the scene, the absence of forced entry, the dogs on the freeway. Each detail either tightens or loosens the narrative around the suspect. Emotion enters not through courtroom arguments, but through contrast. A husband, a home, a body discovered within shared walls. The feeling is one of compression lives, evidence, and timelines pressing inward toward a single figure without yet delivering a final answer. Public attention intensifies, but the case remains disciplined, bound by what can be introduced under oath. One fact stands above the rest. Chance is the only person police publicly identify and charge. The atmosphere around him is tense, unresolved, and the question that now drives the investigation forward is unavoidable: if he is responsible. What pushed the situation from private strain into irreversible violence? That question leads investigators deeper into motive, pressure, and what may have been building beneath the surface long before police crossed the threshold. With the suspect identified and charged, the investigation shifts from proximity to pressure. Why is it always the hardest question? According to prosecutors, motive is not a single moment but an accumulation. Detectives begin examining the space between Kristen and Chance Chavez, where arguments, expectations, and control may have lived long before the night turned violent. Financial records come under scrutiny, bank accounts, spending patterns, obligations are shared and separate. According to court discussions referenced in public reporting, investigators look for stressors that could sharpen conflict debts, disputes over money, or pressures tied to maintaining a household. Nothing here is dramatic on its own. It rarely is. Motive often hides in mundane details that, over time, gain weight. Control becomes another investigative lens. In domestic homicide cases, violence is often preceded by attempts to manage space, movement, or autonomy. The alleged removal of the dogs returns to the foreground, not as an emotional act, but as a functional one. Prosecutors suggest it may reflect an effort to control the environment, to reduce noise, resistance, or interference. If true, it reframes the act as preparation rather than panic. This is where cases become uncomfortable. The evidence no longer sits on a table, it stretches into daily life. Phone records are examined for tone as much as timing. Messages are read not for romance, but for strain. According to the investigation file, there is no indication of an external affair or third-party intrusion driving events. The focus remains inward. At this stage, the prosecution does not need to prove motive beyond a reasonable doubt. They need coherence, a narrative that aligns actions with outcomes. The iron, the blood, the dogs, the absence of forced entry, the presence of the accused. Each piece does not scream motive, but together they suggest escalation, a situation that crossed a line rather than erupted from nothing. Emotion in this phase is subdued but ominous. Motive building is slow and methodical. It lacks spectacle, but it sharpens the case. For the family of Kristen, this is where grief meets explanation. Though explanation does not equal comfort, understanding why does not undo what happened. One fact remains central. Prosecutors continue to hold Chance as the sole suspect. The feeling surrounding that fact is tightening inevitability, as if the case is drawing breath before the next legal shift. And the question now facing the court is not just what happened, but how firmly the evidence will hold when tested publicly. That test begins not at the crime scene, but in a courtroom where bond, control, and credibility come into sharp focus. The case moves from the house to the courtroom without losing its weight. Chance stands before a judge, no longer framed by a doorway, but by procedure. According to court records and reporting from the bond hearing, prosecutors argue that the evidence against him is strong and the risk he poses is serious. The charge is murder. The facts presented are measured, not theatrical. Blood evidence, presence at the scene, the alleged weapon, the dogs. Each element is introduced not to persuade the public, but to justify restraint. Bond becomes the focal point. It is not about guilt or innocence. It is about control. Prosecutors request a high bond, pointing to the severity of the crime and the circumstances surrounding it. They argue that release could pose a danger, or at a minimum, undermine the integrity of the process. The defense counters with familiar ground, no prior convictions, community ties, the presumption of innocence. This is the legal rhythm of early homicide cases, where both sides are positioning for what comes next. The judge listens, weighs. According to reporting, the bond is set at a level that reflects the gravity of the charge. It is a procedural decision, but it carries symbolic weight. It signals how the court views the strength of the case at this stage, not as a conclusion, but as a threshold crossed. The atmosphere in the courtroom is restrained, almost clinical. There are no outbursts, no dramatic testimony, yet the tension is unmistakable. Kristen is absent, but present in every reference to the victim. Her name is spoken carefully. Her life was reduced, for now, to evidentiary relevance. This is how the system works, even when it feels insufficient. Public reaction simmers outside the courtroom. The detail of the dogs, the domestic setting, the immediacy of the arrest all have already shaped opinion. But inside, the case remains insulated from emotion. Judges do not rule on outrage. They rule on risk, law, and precedent. Control, again, becomes the quiet theme. Who controls the narrative? Who controls movement? Who controls the pace of justice? One fact is now fixed. Chance remains charged with murder as the case moves forward. The feeling is one of suspended gravity, as if everything is held in place, waiting. And the question that lingers is larger than this single hearing: how will this case resolve when evidence is tested fully, and what will remain for those left behind when the legal process ends? That question carries the story beyond verdicts and bond amounts, into the aftermath where justice intersects with memory, and where the consequences of violence continue long after the courtroom empties. After the courtroom quiets, the case does not end. It lingers. Kristen Chavez's name remains attached to filings, hearings, and headlines, but for her family, the aftermath is not procedural. It is permanent. According to public statements and reporting, those closest to her are left navigating two parallel realities: the legal process, unfolding in slow motion, and the absence that never pauses. One fact defines the outcome at this stage. Kristen is dead, and her husband remains charged with her murder. The case has not yet reached final adjudication. There is no verdict carved in stone. Allegations remain allegations until proven in court. But the trajectory is set. Evidence has been logged. Timelines drawn. A suspect has been identified. The system has taken custody of the truth-seeking process. Domestic homicide cases rarely offer a clean closure, even when convictions occur. Answers can arrive without relief. Sentences can be handed down without healing. For Kristen's family, the future is divided into before and after, with no bridge between the two. The house in Emma Forest becomes a symbol not of home, but of rupture. Public attention fades, as it often does. New cases emerge. Headlines shift. But certain details from this one persist in collective memory: the iron-turned weapon, the dogs on the freeway, the speed with which the investigation narrowed inward. These elements are not just facts. They are warnings. They illustrate how violence can coexist with routine, how danger can grow in familiar spaces without drawing notice until it is too late. Social lessons surface quietly. This case reinforces what research and case history have long shown. Domestic violence does not always announce itself. It escalates behind closed doors. It exploits trust, proximity, and silence. When it surfaces, it often does so catastrophically. Prevention depends not only on law enforcement but on awareness, intervention, and the willingness to take early signs seriously. Kristen Chavez is remembered not for how she died, but for the life that was interrupted, plans unfinished, relationships severed, a future removed from its own timeline. The justice system will continue its work, methodically, imperfectly. Whatever its final outcome, it cannot return what was taken. One fact remains unaltered by any ruling: Kristen's absence reshaped lives. The feeling left behind is quiet grief, layered with unease. And the question that endures, long after this case file closes, is one society must keep asking: how many warnings go unheard before silence becomes irreversible? This case ends here. The lesson does not. In a mountain village built for winter escape, the last confirmed moments of Ryan Stucka's known life were painfully ordinary. He was 20 years old, from Beaumont, Alberta, and spending the season in Sun Peaks, British Columbia, where he had moved in December 2017 with a close friend to work through the winter. On Friday, February 16, 2018, he worked his shift, returned home, and later went out with friends to a silent disco at a local pub. Nothing in that sequence suggested a crisis. Nothing signaled that the night would harden into one of Canada's most haunting unsolved disappearances. The group left the pub and went to a house party on Burfield Drive, only a short distance from the place Ryan shared with roommates. According to the family's published timeline, that too was ordinary for him. He was social, comfortable with his friends, and not known for abruptly separating from them. Then, sometime around 2:10 a.m. on Saturday, February 17th, the night narrowed to a final sighting. One roommate had already left. A second decided to head home. Ryan was seen standing up, apparently putting on his coat and shoes. That roommate left believing Ryan was right behind him. But within moments, Ryan was gone. The distance home was short. The terrain was familiar. Yet by the next day, Ryan had not shown up for his regular shift at work. His roommates contacted the police and filed a missing person report. Family sources say missing work was out of character. More troubling still, Ryan's phone, social media, and normal lines of contact fell silent from that point forward. No message, no call. No digital trace that publicly changed the story. That is what makes the case so unsettling. Ryan did not vanish on a highway, in a wilderness expedition, or during a long solo trip. He disappeared in the space between a front door and a familiar walk home. Years later, renewed reporting has shown that investigators still have no public answer, and the RCMP has not ruled out foul play, even though no suspicious evidence has been publicly disclosed. The case remains suspended between simple possibilities and a far darker unknown. Before the disappearance became a headline, before search grids and unanswered questions, Ryan Stucke was simply a young man building a season of his life. He grew up in Beaumont, Alberta, a quiet community where routine and familiarity shaped the rhythm of daily life. Friends and family described him as easygoing, social, and grounded. He wasn't someone who drifted aimlessly. He made plans. He followed through. There was a steadiness to him that made what happened later so difficult to reconcile. According to those close to him, Ryan had no history of disappearing, no pattern of withdrawing without explanation. When he left home, he stayed in touch. That consistency would later become one of the first warning signs. In December 2017, just 2 months before he vanished, Ryan made a decision that many people his age make. He left Alberta and moved to Sun Peaks, British Columbia, with a close friend. The goal was simple: work the winter season, experience something new, and step briefly outside the structure of home. Sun Peaks offered exactly that: long days on the mountain, nights with friends, and a tight-knit community built around shared routines. He found work quickly and adapted without difficulty. Co-workers and roommates later described him as reliable. He showed up for his shifts. He kept a normal schedule. There were no known conflicts, no signs of distress that stood out in hindsight. If anything, his life in Sun Peaks followed a pattern that was predictable and stable. His friendships formed quickly, as they often do in seasonal towns. Shared housing, shared work, shared nights out. The environment was transient, but the connections felt immediate. Ryan fit into that world without friction. He attended social events, spent time with friends, and moved through the village with a familiarity that came from routine rather than time. There were no indications of risk. No evidence that he felt unsafe. No reports of arguments, threats, or unusual encounters in the days leading up to February 17, 2018. From every visible angle, Ryan's life was unfolding normally. That normality is what investigators would later return to again and again, because when someone disappears, the answer often hides in what changed. And in Ryan's case, nothing obvious had happened. A young man, far from home but not lost. Surrounded by people. Living a life that made sense. Which is why, when he stepped out into the cold that night and failed to return, the absence felt immediate and deeply wrong. Morning arrived quietly in Sun Peaks, the kind of still winter morning that reveals nothing at first glance. Snow muted the village. The night before seemed to dissolve into routine. But inside one shared home, something was already out of place. Ryan Stucke had not come back. At first, it did not register as an emergency. In a resort town, late nights were common. People stayed at friends' places. Phones died. Plans shifted without notice. But as the hours passed, that assumption began to fracture. Ryan had work scheduled that day. He was known to show up. Reliable. Consistent. That was part of who he was. He didn't arrive. Roommates tried to reach him. Calls went unanswered. Messages received no reply. His phone, normally an active line of connection, had gone silent. According to information later shared by the family, there was no further activity on his device after the early morning hours. No indication of movement. No sign of communication. Just an abrupt stop. By midday, concern had hardened into something more serious. A missing person report was filed with the RCMP. The timeline they provided was tight, almost unnervingly so. Ryan had last been seen around 2:10 a.m., leaving a house on Burfield Drive. His home was only a short walk away. A matter of minutes. A route he knew. A route he had likely taken before. Somewhere within that small window, something had gone wrong. Investigators began with the immediate circle. Friends at the party were questioned. Roommates were asked to reconstruct the night. Who saw him last? What was his condition? Had he seemed upset, intoxicated, or distracted? The answers pointed in one direction: nothing unusual. No argument. No visible distress. No reason to believe he would not simply walk home and go to sleep. Police then turned to the geography of the disappearance. The distance between the party and Ryan's residence was minimal, but the area included open spaces, snowbanks, and partially developed lots. In winter conditions, even a short walk could become disorienting if something disrupted the path. But there was a deeper concern emerging beneath the surface of those early questions. There were no witnesses who saw Ryan after he stepped outside. No confirmed sighting on the road. No one could say they watched him reach the next point in his journey. The moment he left that house, the trail did not just weaken, it vanished. As daylight faded into another cold evening, the situation shifted from uncertainty to urgency. A young man had disappeared within a confined space, in a controlled environment, in a time frame that should have left answers behind. Instead, it left nothing. And as the first full day closed without contact, investigators were forced to confront a question that would define everything that followed. How does someone disappear so completely, so quickly, in a place that small? By the second day, the tone of the investigation had shifted. What began as a concern had become a coordinated search. The Sun Peaks area, usually known for its hustle and bustle, ski lifts, tourists, everything, became more tense and concentrated. RCMP officers began organizing ground efforts, working alongside Kamloops search and rescue. The assumption, at least in the early phase, followed a familiar and urgent line: Ryan may have become disoriented in the cold. Time mattered. Exposure in winter conditions could turn fatal within hours. Search teams moved quickly. They started with the most logical path, the short route between the party on Burfield Drive and Ryan's home. Every meter was examined. Snowbanks were checked. Pathways, roadside edges, and wooded areas just beyond the main trail. Volunteers joined in, forming lines, walking shoulder to shoulder across terrain that had already begun to erase footprints. But the snow was both a clue and an obstacle. Fresh snowfall in the hours after Ryan's disappearance had blanketed the ground, softening any impressions that might have been left behind. If he had stumbled, fallen, or veered off course, the evidence was already fading. The window for reading the landscape had nearly closed before the search even began. Still, they expanded outward. K9 units were deployed, trained to pick up scent and follow it across a distance. Drones equipped with infrared technology scanned from above, searching for heat signatures beneath snow or brush. Helicopters swept over the surrounding area, mapping terrain that could not be easily reached on foot. Snowmobiles carried teams deeper into less accessible sections of the mountain. Each method added coverage. Each pass added hope. But nothing held. No clothing. No footprints that led away from the expected path. No disturbance in the snow that suggested a fall or struggle. The dogs did not produce a definitive trail. The infrared scans revealed no body heat, no hidden form beneath the white surface. It was as if Ryan had stepped out of the house and dissolved into the landscape. Days turned into extended search efforts. The grid widened. Areas were revisited, cross-checked, and searched again under different conditions. Volunteers came in numbers, responding to the urgency of a young man missing in their community. His face began to circulate, on posters, in conversations, in quiet exchanges between people who had never met him but now felt connected to the outcome. And yet, despite the scale of the operation, the result remained unchanged. There was no trace. This absence began to challenge the initial assumption. In cases of exposure, something is usually found, a body, an item, a sign of movement that tells a story of final moments. Here, there was only silence. A search grid lay carefully across a landscape that refused to answer. As the organized efforts continued, investigators were forced to consider a more unsettling possibility. What if Ryan had not remained within the search area at all? As the search efforts expanded without result, the investigation entered a quieter, more complex phase. The urgency of rescue gave way to analysis. Without physical evidence, the case began to rely on possibility, carefully constructed, repeatedly tested, and often left unresolved. The first and most immediate theory was exposure. It was winter in Sun Peaks. Temperatures dropped well below freezing during the night. If Ryan had become disoriented, slipped into a snowbank, or wandered off the main path, hypothermia could have set in quickly. In similar cases, victims are often found within a relatively close radius of where they were last seen. That expectation shaped the early search grids. But the absence of evidence began to erode that theory. Despite extensive sweeps using trained personnel, canine units, and aerial support, no trace consistent with exposure was located. No clothing, no disturbance in the terrain, no remains. Investigators did not publicly confirm any findings that supported a fatal accident in the immediate area. The landscape had been searched too thoroughly to ignore that silence. A second possibility emerged. Perhaps Ryan had taken a different path. A shortcut. A detour. In unfamiliar or poorly lit terrain, even a small deviation could lead to larger consequences. There were construction zones, wooded areas, and undeveloped lots in the vicinity. It was possible, according to some interpretations of the investigation, that he entered an area that had not yet been fully mapped in the earliest hours. But again, the lack of trace complicated the theory. There was also the question of whether Ryan had encountered someone after leaving the party. Foul play has never been ruled out by investigators. However, there has been no publicly confirmed evidence of a struggle, no witness placing him in a confrontation, and no known suspect identified. Still, the complete disappearance, without physical evidence, left space for that possibility to exist. In cases where individuals vanish abruptly within a confined area, investigators often examine whether a vehicle was involved, or whether the person entered a structure willingly or under pressure. Another layer added to the uncertainty: Ryan's digital silence. There was no known activity on his phone after the time he left the house. No outgoing messages. No calls. No use of banking or social platforms. In modern investigations, digital footprints often extend the story beyond the last sighting. In this case, they stopped abruptly, reinforcing the idea that whatever happened occurred quickly. Each theory offered a path forward. None provided closure. The investigation remained suspended between explanations: accident, misadventure, or something more deliberate. Without evidence to anchor one direction, the case resisted resolution. It became defined not by what was known, but by what could not be proven. And as time moved forward, another challenge began to take shape. Because when a case produces no answers, the risk is not just that it remains unsolved, but that it begins to fade. Time moved forward, but the case did not. In many missing person investigations, momentum fades. Leads dry up. Resources shift. Files are archived. But Ryan Stucka's disappearance resisted that pattern. It remained active, not because of new evidence, but because of the absence of it. The unanswered questions were too stark, the timeline too narrow, the disappearance too complete to be set aside. The RCMP continued to treat the case as ongoing. Investigators revisited witness statements, re-examined the known timeline, and remained in contact with the family. Nothing publicly indicated a definitive shift in direction. No suspect was named. No confirmed evidence altered the original framework. But behind that stillness, the case remained open, quietly worked, carefully preserved. Search efforts did not end with the initial operation. In the months and years that followed, organized searches resumed at different intervals. Seasonal changes altered the landscape, offering new opportunities. Snow melted. Terrain became visible again. Areas previously buried under winter conditions could finally be examined in detail. Volunteers returned. Search teams retraced earlier grids, expanded into new zones, and rechecked locations that had once yielded nothing. Each time, the hope was the same, that something had been missed. But each time, the result remained unchanged. No trace of Ryan was found. Public awareness became a critical force in keeping the case alive. His image circulated far beyond Sun Peaks. Posters, media coverage, and online campaigns extended the search beyond physical terrain into the broader public. Tips came in, some vague, some specific, but none that led to a confirmed breakthrough. Investigators followed what they could. Each lead carried the possibility of movement, of direction. But none reshaped the core mystery. There was also the passage of time itself. As months turned into years, the nature of the investigation evolved. The focus shifted from immediate recovery to long-term resolution. The questions remained the same, but the context changed. What had happened in those final minutes? Who, if anyone, had seen something but not realized its importance? Was there a detail overlooked in the earliest hours that now held meaning? Cases like this do not close easily. They persist in a space between action and waiting, between evidence and absence. The file remains open, but the answers remain out of reach. And yet, in Ryan's case, something resisted the silence. The investigation did not disappear, even when progress stalled. Because outside of official efforts, another force had begun to take shape. A family that refused to let the story end. For the Stucka family, time did not soften the uncertainty. It sharpened it. From the moment Ryan was reported missing, his parents stepped into a reality few are prepared for, a life defined not by answers, but by waiting. And when the search efforts in Sun Peaks began to slow, they did not step back. They stepped forward. His mother, Heather Stucka, became the voice of the case. She spoke to the media, organized awareness campaigns, and worked closely with investigators, not as an observer, but as an active participant in the search for her son. Where official updates were measured and cautious, her presence carried urgency. She understood something instinctively: cases like Ryan's could not rely on time alone. They required visibility, pressure, memory. The family returned to Sun Peaks again and again. They walked the same paths Ryan might have taken. They stood in the same areas that had already been searched, trying to see what others might have missed. Not because they believed the answer was obvious, but because doing nothing was not an option. Each visit was both an act of hope and an act of endurance. They built a network. Through social media, community outreach, and public appeals, Ryan's story spread beyond British Columbia. His face became recognizable. His name stayed present. The family worked to ensure that even years later, someone might remember something, a small detail, a passing moment, a piece of information that once seemed insignificant. A reward was offered. An amount that later reached $25,000, intended not as an incentive alone, but as a signal. This case was not closed. This family was still searching. Someone, somewhere, might know something that had not yet been shared. And there was another layer to their effort. They did not accuse. They did not speculate publicly without care. Their message remained focused. If anyone had information, no matter how small, come forward. That restraint carried weight. It preserved the integrity of the case while keeping the door open for truth. Years passed, but the family did not withdraw. They adapted. They persisted. They carried Ryan's story into spaces where official investigations could not always reach. And in doing so, they changed the nature of the case itself. It was no longer just a missing person file. It became a shared responsibility between investigators, the community, and those who refused to forget. Because in disappearances like this, silence can become permanent, unless someone continues to break it. And still, despite everything, one question remained untouched. What really happened in those final minutes? There is no final scene in this case. No courtroom. No confession. No definitive moment where the truth is laid bare and understood. Instead, there is a space, unresolved, unanswered, that has stretched across years. And within that space, Ryan Stucker remains exactly where he was last seen, stepping out into the cold, into the dark, into a silence that has never been broken. For his family, the absence is not abstract. It is daily. There is no certainty to hold on to. No confirmation of life, but also no confirmation of death. This is the condition of ambiguous loss, a state where grief cannot fully settle because the story has no ending. They continue to live between two realities, one where Ryan is gone and one where he could still be found. That tension does not fade. It lingers. In Beaumont, in Sun Peaks, in every place where Ryan once existed as a presence rather than a question, the impact remains. Friends have grown older. Lives have moved forward. But his name still surfaces, often quietly, in conversations that begin the same way, "Do you remember?" The case has become part of the memory of those communities, not because it was solved, but because it wasn't. There are lessons in that silence, about how quickly ordinary moments can fracture. About how even the smallest gap in a timeline, a few minutes, a short walk, can hold an entire mystery. And about the limits of investigation, even with modern tools, when evidence leaves nothing behind. But there is also something else. Persistence. Ryan's case did not disappear because the people connected to him refused to let it. His family continues to ask questions. Investigators continue to keep the file open. The public, in small but meaningful ways, continues to remember. And that collective refusal to accept disappearance as an ending has kept the possibility of truth alive. Somewhere, there may still be an answer. A detail unnoticed. A memory unspoken. A piece of information that has not yet found its way into the light. Cases like this do not always resolve quickly. Sometimes, they wait. Sometimes, they depend on a single moment, a decision to come forward, that changes everything. Until that moment arrives, the story remains unfinished. And in that unfinished space, one question continues to echo. Not just for investigators, not just for a family, but for anyone who hears it. How does someone vanish without a trace, and leave behind only silence? In the late 1990s, women began disappearing from Vancouver's downtown east side, one by one, quietly. According to police records, most were Indigenous women. Many struggled with addiction. Many survived escort. Their absence did not trigger alarms. Not at first. The downtown east side was already marked by poverty, violence, and mistrust of authorities. Disappearances blended into the background noise of daily survival. According to investigative journalism from the Vancouver Sun, and later confirmed in court documents, families who did report missing loved ones were often told the same thing: she probably moved on. The atmosphere was heavy with resignation. Fear traveled faster than information. Women warned each other about dangerous clients. License plates were memorized. Streets were avoided after dark. Though darkness was unavoidable, there was a sense that something was wrong, but no clear shape to name it. By 1997, advocates working in the area began to notice a pattern. Too many women are gone. Too many without contact. According to later findings from the Missing Women Commission of Inquiry, at least dozens of disappearances shared similar timelines and last known locations. Still, the cases were handled separately. Files was opened, then closed again. For the families, the wait was agonizing. Birthdays came and went, but there were no calls. Mothers kept their daughters' rooms untouched, hoping for their return. Sisters went out themselves, searching in alleys for any sign. Later testimony revealed that many families felt abandoned, left to investigate on their own in a city that didn't seem to care about their missing daughters. The police investigation was disorganized. There wasn't a central team, a common strategy, or enough resources. Also, biases influenced what they focused on, a fact that was admitted much later. Anything that couldn't be immediately proven was dismissed as mere chance. But coincidence has limits. As the years passed, the absences accumulated. Names began to repeat in whispers, and somewhere outside the city, according to what investigators would later uncover, a place existed where answers were being concealed in plain sight. By the end of the 1990 seconds, the disappearances were no longer isolated in the minds of those closest to the victims. Mothers compared notes. Outreach workers kept informal lists. According to investigative reporting later reviewed by the Missing Women Commission of Inquiry, more than 30 women connected to the downtown east side had vanished over a span of years. The timeline overlapped. The geography overlapped. The risk factors are also similar. Police files show that reports were scattered across divisions and jurisdictions. Some women were logged as transient. Others were classified as high-risk lifestyles. In several cases, missing persons reports were delayed or downgraded. According to internal reviews later made public, there was no centralized database tracking patterns among the disappearances until years later. Each case stood alone, stripped of context. The atmosphere within the community shifted from worry to dread. Women spoke of a man offering rides. A pig farm outside the city was mentioned in rumors. License plates were partially remembered. According to outreach testimonies, these warnings were passed to police more than once. None led to immediate action. Without bodies, without witnesses willing or able to testify, suspicion remained unformed. Inside police departments, a different pressure existed. Serial murder was an extraordinary claim. It required extraordinary proof. According to later police statements, officers believed many women would resurface, as some had in the past. Resources were stretched thin. Jurisdictional boundaries between Vancouver and the surrounding municipalities complicated coordination. What seemed like caution, in retrospect, became a delay. Families felt dismissed. According to court testimony and media interviews, several relatives were told their daughters were adults who had chosen to leave. The unspoken implication was clear. Some lives were considered harder to lose track of than others. That assumption would later be cited as a critical investigative failure. By 2001, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police began reviewing older files more closely. A tentative task force was formed. Analysts started mapping last known sightings. Patterns emerged slowly. The same corridors, the same time windows, still no suspect. The unease deepened when women who were presumed missing did not resurface. Years passed, no phone calls, no bank activity, no confirmed sightings. Absence became evidence, though it was not yet enough. According to later findings, this was the moment when the investigation stood at a crossroads. Either the pattern was a coincidence on an unprecedented scale, or someone had been operating undetected for years. Where had all the women gone, and who had the power to make them disappear without consequence? The name surfaced quietly, long before it carried weight. Robert William Pickton, a pig farmer in Port Coquitlam. According to police records, his property had already been mentioned in allegations years earlier. Not murder, not disappearance, but violence. In 1997, Pickton was charged with attempted murder after a woman escaped his farm and reported being stabbed. The case collapsed when the victim, struggling with addiction, was deemed unreliable as a witness. The charges were stayed. The file was closed. The farm remained. Pickton lived with his brother on a large rural property bordered by ditches and fields. Pigs numbered in the thousands. According to later court testimony, parties were held there. Locals called it Piggy's Palace. People known as escorts were present. Some were observed leaving. Others disappeared afterwards. However, at the time, there was not enough evidence to prove anything. Rumors circulated in the downtown east side. Outreach workers warned women to avoid a man with pigs. According to the Missing Women Commission, these warnings reached police informally. Without corroboration, they went no further. Pickton was not listed as a suspect. What investigators did not yet know was how often Pickton's name had brushed against the margins of law enforcement. He had been questioned before. He had been noticed before, but nothing had stuck. His lifestyle appeared unremarkable. No criminal convictions, no obvious motive. According to later psychological assessments introduced at trial, Pickton presented as socially awkward, unassuming, and easily overlooked. The farm itself became a kind of blind spot, large, chaotic, difficult to search without a cause. According to police statements, obtaining a warrant would have required specific evidence tied to a specific crime. That evidence did not yet exist. Meanwhile, the disappearances continued. By early 2002, more than 60 women were officially listed as missing from the downtown east side. The task force was under pressure. Public concern was growing. Media scrutiny sharpened. The idea that a predator could operate for years without detection was no longer hypothetical. On February 5, 2002, in February of that year, police returned to Pickton's property, not for missing women, but for an unrelated investigation involving illegal firearms. It was a routine warrant. According to investigators, no one expected what they were about to see. Inside a trailer on the property, police found weapons. But they also noticed something else: items that did not belong to a pig farm. Women's clothing, personal jewelry, prescription bottles bearing female names. According to the investigation file, these discoveries were outside the original scope of the warrant, but they could not be ignored. What had been routine became charged with unease. A second warrant was requested, then a third. As investigators expanded their search, the scale of the property became a problem. 43 acres, dozens of buildings, thousands of animals. According to forensic testimony, the farm was cluttered, unsanitary, and overwhelming. Evidence could be anywhere or nowhere at all. Each step forward raised the possibility that crucial proof had already been destroyed. Then the lab results began to arrive. DNA testing revealed traces of human remains mixed with pig tissue. According to forensic experts who testified at trial, this was not an accident of farming. It was consistent with deliberate processing. Further tests linked DNA from the farm to women who had been reported missing years earlier. Names that families had never stopped saying were now appearing in scientific reports. The feeling among investigators hardened into certainty. This was no longer a missing persons case. It was a homicide investigation. Possibly many. Pickton was arrested and initially charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. Police stated that he showed little reaction to the arrest. He spoke casually and acknowledged knowing the women. However, he did not offer any explanation for the evidence against him. Later, he spoke to an undercover officer, and what he said would significantly alter the course of the case. The search continued, uncovering more remains, teeth, bone fragments, and personal belongings. Each item was carefully catalogued, representing a life cut short. The Crown stated that the sheer amount of evidence surpassed any previous serial murder investigation Canadian law enforcement had managed. The question was no longer whether a crime had occurred, it was how many times, and how many truths were still buried beneath the mud of the farm. The search of the Picton farm did not end quickly. It stretched over months, then years. According to court records, it became the largest forensic investigation in Canadian history. Specialists worked in rotating shifts. Anthropologists, DNA analysts, and evidence technicians combed through soil, buildings, freezers, and waste pits. Each location carried the same quiet tension. Anything could surface. What investigators found was fragmentary. Bone shards no larger than coins, teeth embedded in mud. Traces of DNA were recovered from tools, containers, and processing areas. According to forensic testimony, many remains had been mechanically altered. Some had passed through rendering processes used for animal byproducts. Identification became a painstaking act of reconstruction rather than recognition. Yet names began to emerge. Through mitochondrial DNA and personal effects, investigators linked remains to women who had been missing for years. Some were confirmed homicide victims, others could only be described as probable. According to the prosecution, the evidence supported a minimum number of victims, but not a complete count. The farm had erased too much. The atmosphere around the investigation grew heavier with each confirmation. Families were notified in stages. Some received answers, others received uncertainty. According to victim impact statements later entered into the record, knowing was both a relief and a wound. The waiting had ended, but the truth was incomplete. Picton remained in custody. According to police records, he began speaking to a cellmate who was, in fact, an undercover officer. In those conversations, Picton allegedly described killing dozens of women. He spoke of a goal, 50 victims. According to the investigation file, these statements were recorded. They were chilling. They were also legally complicated. Confessions without corroboration could not all be charged. Prosecutors faced an impossible balance. Charge too many counts without sufficient physical proof and risk acquittal. Charge too few and risk minimizing the scale of harm. According to Crown strategy documents later discussed in open court, they chose a focused path. Few cases with solid proof that can result in convictions. Outside the courtroom, the public struggled with the same question that investigators could not fully answer. If this much had been found, how much was gone forever? And if justice could only name some victims, what did that mean for the rest? The trial ahead would offer accountability, but not closure. The trial of Robert Picton began in January 2006, 4 years after his arrest. According to court transcripts, the judge imposed strict limits on what the jury could hear. The scope was narrow by design. 6 counts of second-degree murder, not the full number of investigators believed possible. Only the cases with the strongest forensic grounding. The courtroom atmosphere was heavy but controlled. Families filled the benches. Some clutched photographs. Others stared forward, unmoving. For many, this was the first time the system appeared to acknowledge what had been taken. But acknowledgement came with conditions. The jury would not hear about the alleged confessions to 50 victims. They would not hear about every recovered fragment. Too much risk of prejudice. Too much complexity. The Crown focused on evidence. DNA recovered from the farm. Personal items traced back to specific women. According to forensic experts, the probability of innocent transfer was astronomically low. The narrative presented was methodical. This woman was last seen here. Her DNA was found there. Her remains were processed in a way consistent with human intervention. Each case stood alone, yet echoed the others. The defense pursued a different strategy. They did not deny the presence of DNA. They questioned contamination. They questioned lab procedures. They suggested secondary transfer. According to defense filings, the argument was not that Picton was innocent, but that certainty was unattainable. Reasonable doubt lived in the margins. Picton himself testified. His demeanor was subdued, at times detached. According to journalists present in the courtroom, he spoke plainly, often without emotion. He denied intentional killing. He suggested accidents. He positioned himself as overwhelmed. Incapable of the precision the Crown described, the contrast between the evidence and his affect unsettled the room. After months of testimony, the jury deliberated. On December 9, 2007, they returned verdicts. Guilty on all 6 counts of second-degree murder. The sentence was life imprisonment, with no possibility of parole for 25 years. It was the maximum available under Canadian law. The families reacted in silence, then tears. Justice had been delivered, but in fragments. Outside the courtroom, the question lingered, unresolved. After the verdict, the number refused to settle. 6 was the legal count. It was not the human count. According to the investigation file, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police identified DNA belonging to at least 33 women on Picton's property. 26 of them were confirmed murdered. Others could not be definitively classified due to the condition of the remains. The gap between what could be proven and what likely occurred became the central wound of the case. Picton's own words complicated everything. In recorded conversations with an undercover officer, he allegedly spoke of killing 49 women. He described mistakes, described learning curves. He spoke with an unsettling lack of urgency. According to prosecutors, these statements were credible in tone but legally insufficient without corroboration. Confession alone, without physical linkage, could not sustain charges. For the families of women not named in court, the trial felt incomplete. According to public statements and inquiry testimony, many felt erased twice, first by the killer, then by the limits of prosecution. Closure remained theoretical. Grief stayed active. The atmosphere shifted from shock to reckoning. Media attention intensified. Journalists began asking not just who Picton was, but how he had been able to operate for so long. According to the Missing Women Commission of Inquiry, systemic failures were now impossible to deny. Reports detailed bias against escorts and Indigenous women, missed opportunities, fragmented policing, warnings dismissed. The question of numbers became symbolic, not a tally, but a measure of institutional blindness. How many disappearances does it take before a pattern becomes undeniable? How many warnings must be ignored before silence becomes complicity? Picton was transferred to a maximum security prison. Appeals were filed, most failed. His legal presence faded, but the shadow of his alleged victim count remained. The number hovered, unresolved, in headlines and memory. And beyond the statistics, a deeper realization emerged. This case was not only about one man, it was about a system that decided, too often, that some lives could vanish without urgency. The case did not end with the sentence. It widened. In the years following Robert Picton's conviction, the province of British Columbia faced questions it could no longer defer. Public pressure mounted. Families demanded explanations, not apologies. In response, the Missing Women Commission of Inquiry was established in 2010 to examine how dozens of disappearances could unfold over more than a decade without decisive intervention. The findings were restrained in tone but severe in implication. According to the Commission's final report, systemic bias had shaped investigative priorities. The escorts were viewed as transient. Indigenous women were treated as high risk rather than high value. Information was siloed. Warnings were dismissed. Opportunities to intervene earlier were missed. Not once, but repeatedly. The atmosphere around the downtown east side changed, though not quickly. Memorials appeared. Names were spoken publicly. Advocacy groups gained visibility. Some policing reforms were introduced, including improved interagency coordination and revised missing persons protocols. According to official statements, these changes were intended to ensure patterns would be recognized sooner. Whether they would be was a question only time could answer. For the families, justice remained partial. Some never received remains. Some received confirmation without context. According to victim impact statements, grief did not resolve. It adapted. The knowledge that their daughters had mattered, finally acknowledged by the state, arrived late and at a cost that could not be repaid. Picton himself receded into the background of the prison system. His appeals failed. His parole eligibility date remained decades away. He no longer occupied headlines, but his case did. It became a reference point in Canadian criminal justice, a warning, a case study, a reminder of what happens when marginalization meets indifference. The social lesson was not abstract. Serial violence does not thrive on secrecy alone. It thrives on neglect. It survives where attention is withheld and assumptions replace urgency. The women did not disappear because no one was looking. They disappeared because, for too long, no one with power chose to see. And the question that remains is not how this happened, but whether it could happen again. In a town where faith shaped everyday life, where families trusted their pastors as much as their own kin, no one imagined that a storm was quietly brewing behind closed doors. Waco, Texas, was the kind of place where people believed tragedies happened somewhere else. But that illusion shattered the night a Baptist minister picked up his phone and made a call that would alter everything. What followed was a tale of deception so deep and a betrayal so cold that it would take years before the truth finally clawed its way to the surface. The story that forces us to ask a chilling question: how well do we really know the people we trust the most? This story unfolded in 2006 in the quiet city of Waco, Texas, home to about 120,000 residents at the time. The community was deeply religious, with many churches and pastors serving local congregations. One of them was a man named Matt Baker. Late on the evening of April 7, 2006, Matt called 911 to report that he had found his wife, Kari Baker, dead in their bedroom. His voice trembled as he told the operator that he thought she had killed herself. According to Matt, Kari was lying naked in bed, motionless. Her lips were blue, her hands were cold, and she had no pulse. Matt claimed he had tried to revive his wife by pulling her from the bed and changing her into regular clothes, hoping it would help. When police and paramedics arrived, they found Kari on the floor. But paramedics could do nothing. Kari was already gone. Beside her was a handwritten note expressing sorrow and regret. In the early morning hours of April 8, 31-year-old Kari Baker was officially pronounced dead. Next to the note were bottles of sleeping pills and alcohol. To the police, it initially looked like a taken her own life. Matt and Kari had first met in 1994 when they were both attending college, although Matt was 7 years older. Just 3 months after meeting, Matt proposed. Kari's parents were shocked by this hasty decision, but she remained determined. They married soon afterward. As devout believers, they waited until after the wedding to begin their intimate life together, something Matt seemed especially eager for. Matt eventually became a Baptist minister, and the Baker family stayed in Waco. Kari became a teacher, working in both elementary education and special needs classes at church. To outsiders, they looked like the perfect church family, devout, loving, and deeply respected. But appearances were deceiving. In 1998, tragedy struck. Their daughter Cassidy, just 1 year old, was diagnosed with a brain tumor. She survived the treatment, but in March 1999, Matt walked into her hospital room and found her unresponsive. She had died. Kari was devastated. Years later, she had 2 more daughters, Kenzie and Grace, but nothing could fill the void left by Cassidy. She attended therapy regularly, but the grief lingered like a dark shadow she couldn't escape. The pain slowly began eroding the marriage, creating emotional distance between Matt and Kari. After Cassidy's death, Matt repeatedly claimed that she had never recovered from losing their daughter. Even Kari's Bible, one Matt had given her, still carried the name Cassidy on the cover. Kari suffered from chronic insomnia and took sleeping pills daily. The evening before her death was painfully close to a difficult date, the 7th anniversary of Cassidy's passing. According to Matt, Kari struggled every year around this time. He insisted she would lock herself in her room for days, silent, withdrawn, barely eating, consumed by grief. Matt told investigators that on the night of April 7th, he left home to rent a light-hearted romantic comedy, then stopped at a gas station before returning home. When he reached their bedroom, the door was locked. He knocked, but heard nothing. Using a screwdriver, he forced the lock open and found Kari lying naked. 1-1. Kari's family, her parents and her sisters, could not accept the idea that she had willingly taken her own life. The so-called suicide note had been typed on a computer, printed out, and left unsigned. Matt insisted that Carrie had been overwhelmed by grief for years, claiming it was only a matter of time before she did something irreversible. But her family knew her too well to believe that. They couldn't understand how Carrie would abandon her two daughters, whom she adored, or walk away from her students, who brought her so much comfort. She loved teaching at the elementary school and had been excitedly waiting for a new job position to open in just a few months. Carrie had real, tangible plans, ones no end her life person makes. Yet despite the strange circumstances, Carrie's death was accepted at face value. No formal investigation took place. Police took a quick look around the baker's bedroom, snapped a few photographs, and left. Just like Matt said, it was an end her life. But Carrie's family refused to let their questions die. They met often, talking about Carrie's life, their marriage, and Matt's behavior. During one of these conversations, they noticed something deeply unsettling. Before Carrie died, her parents had added both her and Matt's numbers to their family phone plan, paying the bill every month and seeing the call logs. After Carrie's death, they noticed that Matt was calling her number constantly, about a dozen times a day for 2 weeks. At first, they assumed he missed her and wanted to hear her voicemail. It was the only comforting explanation they could come up with. Unfortunately, the truth was far worse. When Carrie's parents brought the grandchildren to visit Matt, they were shocked to see that all photos of Carrie had been taken down or removed. Matt, meanwhile, appeared cheerful and energetic, as though he hadn't just lost his wife of 12 years. When they asked about the phone calls, he casually explained that Carrie's number was now being used by another woman, a member of his Baptist church named Vanessa Bulls, who was 8 years younger than Matt and recently divorced. Matt and Vanessa had met through church and grown close. When Carrie's parents began investigating on their own, they uncovered something alarming about Matt's history. During his university years, several women had accused him of inappropriate behavior. Later, when he became a pastor, 2 female parishioners, one of them a minor, also filed complaints. After 2 additional reports of inappropriate behavior, Matt was quietly transferred to another church to avoid scandal. Carrie had always defended him, believing Matt was the victim of lies and misunderstandings. But over time, even she began to doubt his loyalty. She told her therapist she feared her husband was cheating on her and felt trapped, unsure how to escape the situation. After Carrie's death, Matt seemed to recover quickly. He was frequently seen with Vanessa, despite insisting they were just friends. Carrie's family grew certain that Matt had played a role in their daughter's death and filed a civil suit, accusing him of involuntary manslaughter. During the police investigation, disturbing details emerged. The night before Carrie died, Matt had searched online for information about overdosing on sleeping pills. Carrie's body was later exhumed for a second autopsy, but the results were inconclusive. The medical examiner could not determine the cause of death, though one critical detail stood out. Carrie's lungs were clear. She did not choke or inhale any liquid, which is quite unusual in cases of overdose. The family then hired a private investigator, and a second expert report noted faint bruising around Carrie's mouth. This suggests she may have been drugged and then strangled to death, possibly with her mouth gagged to silence her. Matt continued, insisting he was innocent and that his relationship with Vanessa only began after Carrie's death. Carrie's relatives pushed harder, prompting police to finally summon Vanessa Bulls for questioning. When investigators asked Vanessa whether she had ever had a romantic relationship with Matt Baker, she calmly replied that she had not. She added that she was willing to talk, but that they were taking up her time, and that she had a very busy schedule. Her dismissive attitude only deepened suspicion. During her first interview with investigators, Vanessa said almost nothing. She kept her answers brief, avoided details, and clearly held back. But as the investigation progressed and pressure grew, she realized the situation was far more serious than she imagined. Several months later, she finally agreed to cooperate. Her statements changed everything. Vanessa met Matt Baker at church before Carrie's death. In the beginning, Matt simply watched her from a distance and smiled in an unsettling way. One day, he walked up to her and said, "Don't date other men, just date her pastor." He smiled. Vanessa laughed it off, assuming it was a joke. Not long afterward, during a social gathering at the church, Matt approached her again. He pulled her aside to a secluded corner and asked directly whether she genuinely wanted to get to know him better. He also told her that he didn't have any infectious diseases and had undergone a vasectomy, so they wouldn't need contraception. Vanessa reminded him that he was married and asked him if he had ever cheated on her. Matt simply laughed and answered, "No comment." Their affair began 2 months before Kari died. Matt painted a cruel and distorted picture of his wife, telling Vanessa that Kari was a bad mother who constantly made their daughters cry, that she was overweight, depressed, and no longer attractive to him. He repeatedly stated that he wanted Kari to completely disappear from his life. In late February 2006, Matt and Vanessa had their first intimate encounter at the baker's house. Matt told her he had fallen in love with her. Later, in court, Vanessa would describe how Matt preyed on her vulnerability, manipulating her into believing every word he said. According to Vanessa, Matt openly discussed his plans to kill Kari. Around mid-March 2006, he told her that Kari regularly took sleeping pills and that he could make her die from an overdose. He said he once crushed medications, mixed them into a milkshake because Kari drank them often. Kari immediately tasted something strange, assumed the milkshake had spoiled, and didn't drink it. Matt also told Vanessa he wanted to tamper with Kari's car so she would crash and die. Whenever Kari was late, he said he felt a rush of excitement, imagining something terrible might have happened to her. Finally, Matt explained to Vanessa what had happened on the night of April 7, 2006. That afternoon, he had bought some libido-enhancing capsules designed to be easily opened. He emptied the powder inside, refilled the capsules with crushed sleeping pills and sedatives. Then he resealed them and left them on Kari's bedside table, telling her they were libido-enhancing capsules. That evening, Matt and Kari drank alcohol together. Kari took the tampered capsules, while Matt took the real ones so she would not become suspicious. Later, they went into the bedroom. Matt brought out handcuffs, new ones he had recently purchased. He handcuffed Kari to the bed, telling Vanessa it was part of their intimacy. He touched her until she drifted into a heavy, drugged sleep. Then he kissed her forehead, whispered that she should hug Cassidy for him. After that, he placed a pillow over Kari's face. He lay across her body, pressing down, waited. When he thought she was dead, he removed the pillow, only for Kari's eyes to suddenly open as she gasped loudly for air. Matt panicked. Angry that she had not died the first time, he clamped his hand over Kari's nose and mouth until she stopped breathing. After Kari's death, Matt typed a suicide note on the computer, printed it, and placed Kari's hand on the page so her fingerprints would be on the paper. He then locked the bedroom door, left the house to establish an alibi, rented a movie, and parked his car. His daughters were asleep in the other room. When he returned home, he forced the bedroom door open with a screwdriver and dialed 911, performing the role of a shocked and grieving husband. 5 days later, Matt met Vanessa and calmly explained how he had gotten rid of Kari. Before leaving, he warned her not to tell anyone about that, or she would regret it. Afterward, he sent Vanessa an MP3 file of a song by an American rock band titled Little Dirty Secret, a song he was obsessed with. Later, he called her again and repeated the threat, telling her he would be just as disappointed in her as he had been in Kari if she ever revealed his secret. Vanessa continued seeing Matt for a short time after Kari's death, but by July 2006, just 3 months after the tragedy, their relationship ended, and they stopped all contact. Despite this, Vanessa would later become the key witness in the case. Investigators recovered several emails from Matt's computer in which he described the milkshake incident, explaining that Kari had refused to drink it because she noticed the strange taste. In another message, he wrote that next time he would mix in more chocolate along with the crushed medications so she wouldn't detect the bitterness. Matt pleaded not guilty and used every possible argument to defend himself, insisting that Kari had taken her own life. But the evidence against him continued to build. Finally, in January 2010, after a lengthy investigation and trial, Matt Baker was found guilty. He was sentenced to 65 years in prison for murdering his wife and concealing her murder. For more than a decade, Matt repeatedly fought for his release, filing appeals and maintaining his innocence. In 2020, his final appeal was denied. To this day, he still refuses to admit any responsibility for Kari's death. It is also known that during his time in prison, Matt was repeatedly assaulted by other inmates as revenge for repeated wrongdoings he had committed both during his college years and as a pastor. One day, in the store, the woman walked toward the back area and stumbled upon a horrifying scene. The body of a woman lying in a pool of blood. She was shaken to her core. What intensified her terror was the realization that she had seen this woman alive in the store only hours earlier. Fighting the urge to scream, she slowly backed away from the body, only to bump into someone behind her. Ginger Rios was born in Las Vegas, Nevada, to Denise and George Rios. She grew up alongside her sister, Daniela, in a close-knit family. From a young age, Ginger was vibrant, energetic, full of ambition. She loved music, dancing, and singing, often spoke of performing on stage one day. As a child, she once promised her mother that if she pursued the arts, she would someday become Miss Las Vegas. Ginger thrived in social settings, lighting up every room she entered. Her intelligence, warmth, and charisma made her unforgettable to those who knew her. As she grew older, Ginger pursued her passion professionally, working as a backup dancer in a show called The Salsa Machine. When she was 20 years old, she met Mark Hollinger, who was 34 at the time. Despite the age difference, Ginger was confident and mature beyond her years. Her parents initially had concerns but ultimately approved of Mark after seeing how happy and secure Ginger was with him. Their bond formed quickly and deeply. Eventually, they got married and moved in together, determined to build a stable future, especially with thoughts of eventually starting a family. Ginger decided to look for a book that could help them improve their credit. This was 1997, long before financial advice was readily available online. On April 4, 1997, Ginger and Mark were driving along Maryland Parkway in Las Vegas when they noticed the familiar storefront of Spycraft. The store stood out immediately, its windows filled with cameras and unusual equipment. Spycraft was part of a chain with multiple locations across the western United States and was known for selling surveillance devices, tracking tools, and books on specialized topics. Mark stayed in the car while Ginger went inside. She planned only a quick stop to browse. She took nothing with her except her wallet, leaving the rest of her belongings in the vehicle. Spycraft attracted all kinds of customers. Some were simply curious or concerned parents, but others had more questionable motives, looking for devices that could be used without drawing attention. At the time, the store was operated by Craig Leslie Jacobson and his wife. Minutes passed, then more time. Ginger didn't return. Mark waited in the parking lot, watching the entrance carefully. If Ginger had stepped outside, he would have seen her, but she never emerged from the front door. Anxiety began to creep into him. Ginger's delay was completely out of character, especially since they still had errands to run. Finally, Mark got out of the car, entered the store. He went straight to the counter and asked about Ginger, wanting to know whether she was still inside. The response stunned him. Jacobson told Mark that Ginger had already made a purchase and left the store some time earlier. Mark knew immediately that this wasn't true. Alarmed, Mark began searching the store aisle by aisle, calling her name. Ginger was nowhere to be found. Clearly, something bad has happened. Mark returned to the store owners, pleading with them to help locate his wife. Jacobson repeated the same story, insisting that Ginger had made a purchase and already left the store. This response only deepened Mark's confusion and growing sense of dread. With no other options, he left the shop and called his in-laws, reaching George Rios, Ginger's father, to tell him that she was missing. George initially suggested that Ginger might have stepped into a nearby store and that Mark may simply have missed her leaving. At first, George was not overly alarmed. But as the hours passed and there was still no sign of Ginger, concern quickly turned into fear. This behavior was completely out of character for her. She would never disappear without saying anything. Adding to the worry, Ginger's bag was still in the car with Mark, and the only thing she had taken with her was her wallet, which contained very little cash. It became increasingly clear that she had not left voluntarily. Both George and Mark realized they needed to report Ginger missing. Sensing that something serious had happened, that evening, George and Mark returned to the spycraft store, hoping to review the surveillance footage to track Ginger's movements. When they arrived, the shop was closed. Craig Jacobson and his wife were outside near a van. Mark and George approached them, asked to see the security footage. Jacobson said he were busy at the moment and told them to come back over the weekend if they wanted to view it. There was nothing more they could do that night. Though Mark and George went their separate ways, Ginger's disappearance hung over them like a dark cloud. By the following Monday, she was officially reported missing to the police. Detectives immediately noted how unusual the situation was. At first, they considered whether Ginger might have run away, but a review of her bank accounts quickly ruled that out. Her money remained untouched, exactly as it had been on the day she vanished. Ginger also carried very little cash, making it unlikely she could have gone anywhere intentionally. With that possibility eliminated, investigators began assembling a list of potential suspects. As is standard procedure, Mark Hollinger was among the first people scrutinized. What puzzled the investigators was Mark's reaction when Ginger went missing. Instead of contacting the police immediately, he had called her father first. From a law enforcement perspective, this hesitation seemed suspicious. Then, just days after Ginger's disappearance, something even more unusual occurred. Mark's car caught fire and was completely destroyed. Police viewed the incident with deep suspicion, believing the fire was unlikely to have been accidental. Investigators began to suspect that the vehicle may have been deliberately set ablaze to destroy potential evidence. Eventually, police conducted a thorough investigation into Mark. Throughout questioning, he remained firm, insisting he had nothing to do with Ginger's disappearance and claiming he was just as desperate to find her as everyone else. As for the fire, Mark explained that the car had overheated while he was driving home and suddenly burst into flames. He said he barely managed to escape as the fire spread rapidly. By the time he tried to react, the flames were out of control. At the time, cell phones were not widely used, and finding a payphone was not always easy. The burned-out car was seized and carefully examined for any evidence that might shed light on Ginger's disappearance. With no evidence tying him to a crime, Mark was ultimately released. As days passed without any sign of Ginger, investigators faced a difficult truth. Something had definitely happened to her. Police shifted their focus to Spycraft, the store where Ginger Rios had last been seen alive. Investigators wanted to review the store's surveillance footage, but quickly ran into obstacles. Craig Leslie Jacobson, the store's owner, was reportedly in Phoenix, Arizona, overseeing another location. Without him present, officers were unable to access any video recordings. Even so, they decided to examine the premises themselves. When officers entered the bathroom at the back of the store, they were immediately struck by a strong odor of bleach. On the wall, they noticed a single, tiny red stain. Though small, it appeared suspicious. When questioned, Jacobson quickly offered an explanation. He claimed that his dog had made a mess in the bathroom and that he had used bleach to eliminate the odor. He further insisted that the stain on the wall was also caused by the dog. In 1997, DNA technology was limited, and such a small trace was difficult to analyze with certainty. When asked again about Ginger, Jacobson repeated the same story he had told Mark. But when officers asked him to produce either the video or the receipt, he was unable to do so. whether this was due to deception or poor record-keeping. It raised serious red flags. Investigators sensed that something was wrong, but without concrete evidence. They couldn't do anything. With no progress at the store, police turned their attention to Ginger's work as a performer. They explored the possibility that she might have been stalked or targeted by someone unstable. Despite following multiple leads, this line of inquiry led nowhere. By then, nearly a month had passed since Ginger vanished, and the investigation was at a standstill. There were no solid leads, no reliable witnesses, no answers. A few months later, a woman came forward to provide information. Her testimony would finally provide clarity about what had happened. The woman's name was Cheryl. She was Craig Leslie Jacobson's wife at the time. Cheryl revealed critical details that investigators had never heard before. When asked why she had remained silent for so long, she said she feared what he might do if she spoke up, especially because she was the one who had found Ginger. Cheryl believed that speaking out could put both her and her infant child in grave danger. According to Cheryl, from the moment Ginger entered the store, Craig's attention became disturbingly fixated on her. She described his stare as intense and unsettling, as though he couldn't take his eyes off Ginger. Shortly after Ginger arrived, Craig ordered Cheryl to retrieve something from the back of the store, something he frequently did, often barking commands without explanation. Cheryl went to the back as instructed. When she returned a few minutes later, Ginger was gone. At first, Cheryl assumed Ginger had simply made her purchase and left. Around that same time, Mark entered the store, visibly worried, asking where his wife was. Cheryl genuinely didn't know what to tell him. After Mark left, however, Jacobson warned her not to go into the storage area at the back of the store. Despite her fear, Cheryl decided to go back anyway. When she opened the door, she nearly screamed. Ginger was lying on the floor, motionless. As Cheryl staggered backward in shock, she ran directly into Jacobson. An encounter straight out of a nightmare. He stepped close to her and threatened her, warning that if she ever told anyone what she had seen, both she and her baby would suffer the consequences. Cheryl later told investigators that Jacobson confessed to her what he had done while she was away. According to her account, he had grabbed Ginger from behind and attacked her, killing her inside the store. He offered no explanation, no justification. The horror of Ginger's final moments was almost impossible to comprehend. A young woman, alone in a store, brutally attacked, killed by a man she had never met, while help was just feet away, and no one knew. Cheryl recalled that, to conceal the crime, Craig Jacobson, along with another employee, thoroughly cleaned the back room of the Spycraft store using large amounts of bleach. Afterward, Jacobson placed Ginger's body into a van, the very same van beside which he and Cheryl had been standing when Mark and George came searching for Ginger. That night, Ginger's husband and father had unknowingly stood just feet away from her lifeless body. Even more devastating was the fact that Cheryl knew exactly where Ginger was at that moment. But fear kept her silent in her husband's presence. Cheryl told police that about a month later, she, Jacobson, and their infant child traveled to Arizona desert, where Jacobson buried Ginger's body in a remote desert area inside a wooden box. Authorities eventually discovered a body in the desert, but at the time, it could not be positively identified as Ginger. When Jacobson learned that remains had been found, he immediately fled. It was ultimately Cheryl who led investigators to the precise location where Ginger's body had been concealed. The remains were found buried beneath sand and concrete. Later, forensic testing confirmed that the body belonged to 20-year-old Ginger Rios. Following this discovery, police obtained a search warrant for the Spycraft store. Inside, investigators found traces of Ginger's DNA in the back room. An even more disturbing revelation soon followed. Craig Leslie Jacobson was a fugitive with an extensive criminal history. Years earlier, Jacobson had fled under an alias to avoid prosecution for burglary and theft. After serving time, he changed his name again, married Cheryl, and continued operating spycraft stores across several western states, including a location in a Las Vegas strip mall. It remains unclear whether Cheryl was aware of the full extent of his criminal past. Investigators also uncovered troubling patterns. Reports indicated that Jacobson often fixated on women with dark hair. One young man later claimed that Jacobson had paid him to photograph such women. In August 1997, Jacobson was arrested in Los Angeles following a confrontation with a police officer. Though details of that incident were limited, he was quickly extradited back to Nevada and formally charged with Ginger's murder. During legal proceedings, Jacobson ultimately confessed to killing Ginger, claiming that he suffered from schizophrenia and displaying erratic behavior. Prosecutors, however, argued that he was not mentally ill and was deliberately feigning symptoms in an attempt to secure a lighter sentence. Reports from within the prison system suggested that Jacobson had openly discussed plans to pretend insanity in order to manipulate the courts. Although prosecutors initially considered seeking the death penalty, they eventually offered Jacobson a plea agreement, which he accepted. Under the terms of the deal, Jacobson was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years and ordered to pay approximately $3,200 in restitution to Ginger's family. There was, however, another chilling discovery. Another set of remains was found in the desert near Ginger's burial place. Years later, authorities identified her as Christina Marie Martinez, a teenager believed to have also been killed by Jacobson. Christina was 15 years old when she disappeared in May 1987, after visiting a nearby laundromat. She lived in a group home in Arizona, located across the street from a branch of the Spycraft store. Tragically, no immediate large-scale search was launched for Christina, likely due to her troubled background and prior encounters with law enforcement. She went missing for many years before her body was found in the desert. In 2015, after completing his sentence in Nevada, Jacobson was extradited to Arizona to face charges related to Christina's murder. In 2016, a judge in Maricopa County Superior Court initially ruled Craig Jacobson mentally incompetent to stand trial. That decision was later reversed, with the court concluding that he had been exaggerating or feigning mental illness. On September 21, 2017, judge approved a defense request for an additional competency evaluation. Since then, there have been no significant public updates in the case. Craig Leslie Jacobson remains incarcerated. Investigators have long suspected that Ginger Rios and Christina Marie Martinez may not have been his only victims. In May 1997, he was also suspected in the disappearance and possible murder of another young woman, Mary Stoddard, whose body has never been recovered. The death of Ginger left a deep and permanent scar on her family, who continued to carry the weight of their grief long after the case was closed. At one point, Craig Jacobson even wrote letters to Ginger's father, expressing remorse for the pain he had caused. In those letters, he claimed he attacked Ginger because she had supposedly snapped at him inside the store that day. But nothing in his explanation could justify murder. Tragically, Ginger's mother, Denise Rios, passed away from cancer on July 24, 2014, carrying with her the unbearable pain of losing her daughter years earlier. Her passing left Ginger's father, George Rios, and her sister, Daniela, to navigate their grief alone. The only comfort they found was believing that Ginger and Denise were together again in a place free from suffering. Ginger had been looking forward to her future. She dreamed of owning a home with her husband, raising children, and watching her family grow. She hoped to perform on stage, to dance, to sing, and to build the creative life she had always imagined. But she never had the chance to reach those dreams. Her life was stolen at just 20 years old, long before she could see any of it unfold.